The stagecoach door swung open, and the woman who stepped down into the Wyoming dust was crying so hard she could barely stand. Every man, woman, and child in Willow Creek froze, because they all knew what those tears meant. A ruined bride, a desperate woman, a scandal so dark it had chased her halfway across America. Weston Hale stood there in his worn boots and dusty hat, watching his mail-order bride fall apart in front of the entire town. And he had one choice to make: send her back east on the next stage, or become the fool who married damaged goods. What happened next shocked everyone, including Eleanor herself. But before I tell you how a disgraced Boston socialite became the most fearless woman on the frontier, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The advertisement had been simple, almost insulting in its brevity. Rancher seeking wife, must be strong, honest, and willing to work. No delicate flowers, no liars. Wyoming territory. Eleanor Whitmore had read it 17 times before her hand stopped shaking enough to write a response. She'd been living in a boarding house on the wrong side of Boston for 3 months by then, the kind of place where women didn't ask each other's names and landladies demanded payment in advance. Her trunk sat in the corner of a room that smelled like mildew and someone else's disappointment. And every morning she woke up wondering if today would be the day she'd have to sell her mother's necklace just to eat. The scandal had taken everything else. Her name, her friends, her future. The man she'd trusted had made sure of that before he disappeared into married respectability, leaving her to face the consequences alone. Boston society had a long memory and absolutely no mercy for women who made mistakes, especially mistakes that showed. By the time the bleeding started, Eleanor was already a ghost in her own city. The doctor had been kind, at least. He'd told her she was lucky, which felt like the cruelest word in the English language. Lucky to lose the baby. Lucky the fever hadn't killed her. Lucky she'd have no permanent proof of her ruin walking around calling her mama. She hadn't felt lucky. She'd felt hollow. The advertisement had appeared in a 2-week-old newspaper someone had left in the boarding house parlor. Eleanor had been staring at the wall, trying to figure out how to disappear completely, when the words Wyoming territory caught her eye. Wyoming. About as far from Boston as a person could get without falling off the edge of the world. She wrote the letter that night. No lies. She'd had enough of those. But no complete truth either. Just enough honesty to ease her conscience and enough omission to maybe, possibly, get an answer. I am 24 years old. I can read, write, and cipher. I taught school before circumstances forced me to leave Boston. I am not delicate. I am not afraid of work. I have no family and no prospects. If you are willing to take a chance on a woman with nothing to her name but determination, I will come to Wyoming and do my best to be a good wife. She'd signed it Eleanor Whitmore and posted it before fear could stop her. The response came 4 weeks later, written in blunt, unadorned script. Come to Willow Creek. Arrive before first snow. I'll marry you if you're honest and you'll work. That's all I ask. Stage fare enclosed. There had been $23 in the envelope, a small fortune to Eleanor, who'd been down to her last 4. No sweet words, no promises. Just $23 and a ticket west. She'd left Boston on a Tuesday morning when the fog was so thick you couldn't see across the street. Nobody came to see her off. There was nobody left who cared. The journey west had taken 11 days by train, then another 3 by stagecoach once the rails ended. Eleanor had watched the country change through dirt-filmed windows, cities giving way to towns, towns giving way to nothing but grass and sky that went on forever. The other passengers changed too. The fancy Boston ladies in their silk traveling suits disappeared somewhere around Chicago. By the time they crossed into Wyoming territory, Eleanor was sharing the coach with a whiskey drummer, a mining engineer, and a woman who claimed to be a widow but probably wasn't. Nobody asked Eleanor's story. Out here, apparently, people had the grace to mind their own business. The stagecoach hit a rut hard enough to bounce Eleanor off her seat. She grabbed the window frame, her stomach lurching. Morning sickness had been gone for months, but her body still remembered. Sometimes she woke up expecting the nausea, the tenderness, the terrifying certainty that her life was about to change forever. Then she'd remember. There was no baby. There never would be, the doctor had said. The infection had seen to that. Another thing the scandal had taken from her. Willow Creek, 15 minutes, the driver shouted. Eleanor's hands started shaking again. She pressed them flat against her skirt, brown wool, practical, already dusty from the road. Not the kind of dress a bride should wear. But she wasn't the kind of bride anyone would write songs about either. The mining engineer glanced at her. You got people in Willow Creek? I'm meeting someone. Meeting or marrying? The whiskey drummer grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Only reason women come to these frontier towns is marriage or whoring, and you don't look like the whoring type. Eleanor's face burned, but she kept her voice steady. I'm getting married. Well, good luck to you. Wyoming men are hard as the land. You'll need all the luck you can get. She didn't answer. Luck hadn't done much for her lately. The stage crested a low hill, and Willow Creek appeared below. A collection of wooden buildings sprawled along a creek that probably had willows somewhere, though Eleanor couldn't see any from here. It was smaller than she'd expected. One street, maybe 24 buildings, and enough empty space around it to make Boston feel like a fever dream. This was going to be her home. This collection of raw lumber and hope in the middle of nowhere. The stage rolled to a stop in front of a building with General Store painted on the false front. Dust billowed up around the wheels. Through the window, Eleanor could see people gathering, curious faces, judgmental eyes, the universal human hunger for something new to talk about. Her throat tightened. Here we are, miss. The driver opened the door, and Wyoming heat poured in like a physical thing. Watch your step. Eleanor stood on shaking legs. For one wild moment, she wanted to tell the driver to keep going, take her somewhere else, anywhere else. Drop her in the middle of the prairie and let her walk until she disappeared completely. But there was nowhere else to go. She'd burned Boston behind her. This was her only chance. She took the driver's hand and stepped down into the dust, and immediately felt every eye in Willow Creek lock onto her. A woman in a faded calico dress stood outside the general store, arms crossed, face pinched with speculation. Two men loitering near the saloon straightened up, openly staring. A group of children froze mid-game, watching this strange woman who'd just arrived like she might do something interesting. Eleanor's chest constricted. She'd been stared at before, walking through Boston after the scandal broke, every whisper following her like a curse. But somehow, this felt worse. These people didn't know her story yet. They were waiting to see what kind of woman stepped off the stage to marry a man she'd never met. They were waiting to judge her. Your trunk, miss. The driver hauled her single battered trunk down from the top of the coach. One trunk. Everything she owned in the world, and it wasn't even full. Is Mr. Hale here? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. That'd be him. The driver nodded toward a man standing apart from the crowd, near a wagon hitched to two patient horses. Eleanor's heart stuttered. Weston Hale was tall. That was her first thought. Tall and broad-shouldered in a way that made the men back east look like boys playing dress-up. He wore dusty work clothes, a hat pulled low against the sun, and an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. He didn't move as she looked at him, didn't smile, didn't even nod. Just stood there like a fence post, watching her with eyes she couldn't read from this distance. This was her future husband, this silent, unmoving stranger. Eleanor's vision blurred. Oh, no, not now, not here. But her body didn't care about dignity or first impressions. The tears came anyway, hot and humiliating, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. 3 months of holding everything together, and her composure chose now to shatter. She heard the whispers start immediately. Lord have mercy, she's crying. Hasn't even met him yet, and she's already falling apart. Another one who can't handle frontier life. Give her a week. Eleanor pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the sobs building in her chest. This was worse than Boston. At least there, people had whispered behind her back. Here, they were doing it right to her face. Miss Whitmore. The voice was deep, quiet, and much closer than she'd expected. Eleanor looked up through her tears to find Weston Hale standing directly in front of her. Up close, he was even bigger than she'd thought, and younger. Maybe 30, with sun-weathered skin and dark eyes that didn't look cruel exactly, but didn't look soft either. I'm sorry. She wiped at her face with shaking hands. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. You tired? The question caught her off guard. What? It's a long trip from Boston. You tired? He said it like it was a perfectly reasonable thing to ask a woman who was falling apart in the middle of the street. Eleanor managed a shaky nod. Hungry? Another nod. Then we'll get you fed and rested. Everything else can wait. He picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing and carried it to the wagon. Come on. She stood there, tears still wet on her face, unable to process what had just happened. He wasn't sending her back. He wasn't demanding explanations. He was talking about food and rest like she was a tired traveler instead of a crying disaster. Miss Whitmore. He'd loaded the trunk and was waiting by the wagon, one hand extended to help her up. You coming? The woman in calico made a disapproving noise. Weston Hale, you can't seriously be taking her to your ranch in that state. Girl's clearly not fit for— Wasn't asking your opinion, Mrs. Fletcher. Weston's voice didn't rise, but something in it made the woman's mouth snap shut. He looked back at Eleanor. Ignore her. Ignore all of them. You ready? Eleanor took a breath that hurt going down. Then she crossed the space between them and put her hand in his. His palm was calloused, warm, and completely steady. He helped her up onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins without another word to anyone. As they pulled away from the general store, Eleanor could feel the town's eyes on her back. Judging, speculating, probably taking bets on how long she'd last. She didn't look back. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking over rutted road that led away from town into open prairie. The sun was starting to sink, painting everything gold and amber. It was beautiful in a way that made Eleanor's chest ache. So much space, so much sky, so completely unlike anywhere she'd ever been. I'm sorry I cried, she said finally. That's not how I wanted to arrive. Weston kept his eyes on the road. You got a reason to cry? The question was so direct it stole her breath. This was it. The moment where she either told the truth or built her marriage on lies. She'd had enough of lies. Yes, her voice was barely a whisper. I have a very good reason. He didn't respond right away, just drove the wagon, hands steady on the reins, while Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. You want to tell me? He asked finally. Not particularly. Fair enough. Eleanor blinked. You don't want to know? Didn't say that. Said it's fair if you don't want to tell me yet. He glanced at her briefly, then back at the road. Figure we got time. We're going to be living together. Things come out eventually. You might not want to marry me when you hear it. Might not. But I already paid for your ticket and told the town you were coming, so seems like we should at least have a conversation before anyone makes any decisions. He shifted on the seat. You eat today? The change in subject made her dizzy. Not since breakfast. There's jerky in the bag behind you. Help yourself. Eleanor twisted around and found a canvas bag tucked behind the seat. Inside was dried meat, a canteen of water, and 2 slightly squashed biscuits. Her stomach growled loudly enough that Weston definitely heard it. Go on, he said. It's a 2-hour ride to the ranch. You'll feel better with something in your stomach. She took a piece of jerky, mostly because arguing seemed pointless. It was tougher than anything she'd ever eaten, salty and gamey, and absolutely delicious. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating. Weston drove without talking, which should have made Eleanor nervous, but somehow didn't. The silence wasn't hostile, it was just there. Like the prairie stretching out on all sides, like the sky turning pink and orange overhead. After a while, she found her voice again. Why did you defend me? Back in town. With Mrs. Fletcher. Wasn't defending you, was telling the truth. She doesn't have any right to opinions about my business. Still, you could have sent me back on the next stage. Could have. He was quiet for a moment. But I wrote to you asking for honesty and work. You showed up, didn't you? That's honest. And I figure anyone who comes all the way from Boston to Wyoming territory is probably willing to work. He glanced at her again. So unless you lied in your letter about being able to read and cipher, seems like you're holding up your end. I didn't lie about that. Then we'll start there. Eleanor studied his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the way he squinted slightly against the setting sun. He wasn't handsome, exactly. His face was too weathered, too stern, but there was something solid about him, something that didn't shift or change with the wind. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. Why did you advertise for a wife? There must be women in Willow Creek who would have married you. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. You met Mrs. Fletcher. That's most of the available women in Willow Creek. Nosy, opinionated, and come with families that think they should have a say in how a man runs his ranch. He shook his head. Didn't want that. Wanted someone who'd come for the right reasons. What are the right reasons? Honest work. Fair deal. No pretending to be something you're not. He met her eyes fully for the first time. I don't need a woman who's going to simper and pretend the frontier's not hard. It is hard. It'll break you if you're not strong enough. But if you are strong enough. He turned back to the road. If you are, We might build something worthwhile. Eleanor's throat tightened again, but not with tears this time, with something that felt dangerously close to hope. The sun was nearly down when they reached the ranch. It appeared gradually, first a dark smudge against the horizon, then details resolving as they got closer. A house, barn, a few outbuildings, split rail fences marking off pastures where cattle grazed. It was small compared to the Boston estates Eleanor had visited in her old life, but out here in all this emptiness, it looked like civilization. It looked like someone had decided this spot in the middle of nowhere was worth claiming. Weston pulled the wagon up to the house, a simple structure, timber framed with a covered porch. Not fancy, but well built, solid. "Welcome to the Hale Ranch," he said. "It's not much, but it's mine. Built most of it myself." Eleanor climbed down from the wagon on shaking legs. Now that they'd stopped moving, exhaustion hit her like a physical weight. 11 days of travel, 3 days of stagecoach, and the emotional devastation of the last few months all caught up at once. She swayed. Weston was there immediately, one hand on her elbow, steadying her. "Easy. You're about done in, aren't you?" "I'm fine." "You're a liar." But he said it almost gently. "Come on. Let's get you inside before you fall down." The house was dim inside, lit only by the last of the sunset coming through the windows. Eleanor had an impression of simple furniture, a stone fireplace, and floors that could use a good sweeping. It smelled like wood smoke and bacon grease and man. Not unpleasant, just lived in. "Bedroom's through there." Weston nodded to a door on the far wall. "I'll sleep in the barn until we're married proper." Didn't seem right to assume otherwise. Eleanor stared at him. Every other man she'd known would have assumed exactly otherwise, would have expected her gratitude to be expressed in the most physical way possible. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me for basic decency." He moved to the fireplace and started building up the fire with practiced efficiency. "There's a pump out back for water, privy's behind the barn. I'll bring your trunk in and then make us some supper. You just sit down before you fall down." Eleanor sat in one of the rough wooden chairs at the table, watching him work. He moved around the kitchen like he'd done this 1,000 times, building the fire, filling a pot with water, slicing bacon. No wasted motion, no hesitation. "How long have you been alone out here?" she asked. 3 years, had the land for 5, but took time to build everything up." He set the bacon to frying. "Had some help the first couple years. Hired men, cowboys passing through. But they move on eventually. Gets lonely, doing everything yourself." "Is that why you wanted a wife? Because you were lonely?" He considered this while the bacon sizzled. "Partly. But also because a ranch runs better with 2 people. One person gets sick or hurt, the whole operation falls apart. 2 people can keep things going." He looked at her directly. "I won't lie and say I'm looking for a love match. I'm looking for a partner, someone who will work beside me and build something that lasts." "What if I'm not strong enough?" The question came out before Eleanor could stop it. "What if I can't handle it?" "Then you'll tell me, and we'll figure out what to do." "But I don't think you're as weak as you think you are." He flipped the bacon. "Woman who comes all the way from Boston to Wyoming by herself has some steel in her spine, even if she cries sometimes." Eleanor felt her eyes burn again. Not with despair this time, with something else, something unfamiliar. They ate in silence, bacon, beans, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. It was simple food, but Eleanor was so hungry she didn't care. She cleaned her plate and accepted a second cup of coffee, feeling strength seep back into her body with each bite. When they finished, Weston carried her trunk into the bedroom while Eleanor washed the dishes in water heated over the fire. The domestic normalcy of it was strange, surreal. This morning she'd been on a stagecoach heading into the unknown. Tonight she was washing dishes in a Wyoming ranch house, while the man who wanted to marry her hauled her belongings into the bedroom. Her bedroom, for now. "You should get some rest," Weston said when he came back. "We can talk more tomorrow." Eleanor dried her hands on a rough towel. The moment she'd been dreading had arrived. She could go to bed, let him believe she was the woman from her letter, and deal with the truth later. Or she could be honest now, like she'd promised. "There's something you need to know," she said quietly, "before you decide whether to marry me." Weston went still. Then he nodded and sat down at the table, gesturing for her to do the same. "All right? I'm listening." Eleanor sat. Her hands were shaking again, so she pressed them flat against the table. The wood was scarred and stained, marked by years of use. Honest wear from honest work. She could do this. She could be honest. I told you, circumstances forced me to leave Boston, she began. That was true, but I didn't tell you what those circumstances were. Go on. There was a man, Charles Whitmore. Just saying his name made her stomach turn. He was charming, educated, from a good family. He courted me properly for months, talked about marriage, about our future together. She swallowed hard. I believed him. Weston's expression didn't change. He just listened. He said we should anticipate our vows. That's how he put it, anticipate. Like it was sophisticated instead of what it really was. Her voice cracked. I was stupid. I trusted him. I thought we were as good as married already. What happened? I got pregnant. The words felt like stones in her mouth. And Charles suddenly remembered he was engaged to someone else. Someone from an even better family. Someone whose father had money and connections. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept talking. He told me to handle it discreetly. Gave me money and the name of a doctor who would take care of the problem. Weston's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I didn't go to that doctor. I couldn't. But it didn't matter, because my body took care of it anyway. She wiped her eyes roughly. I lost the baby at 3 months. Almost died from the fever afterward. And by the time I was well enough to leave my room, everyone in Boston knew. Charles made sure of that. He spread the story himself, painted me as a woman who'd tried to trap him into marriage, who'd gotten what I deserved. Bastard, Weston said quietly. His family had lawyers, mine didn't. He walked away with his reputation intact. I lost everything. My position at the school, my friends, my standing in society. My landlady evicted me. I lived in a boarding house for women with nowhere else to go, and even they whispered about me. She met Weston's eyes, forcing herself not to look away. That's who I am. That's what you'd be getting if you married me. A ruined woman. A scandal. Someone who might not even be able to give you children. Because the doctor said the infection might have... She couldn't finish that sentence. The silence stretched out like the prairie outside. Weston stood up, and Eleanor's heart sank. This was it. He was going to tell her to leave, ask her to take the next stage back east. She'd been honest, and honesty had cost her everything again. But he didn't head for the door. He walked to the fireplace, stared into the flames for a long moment, then turned back to her. That man's name was Whitmore? She nodded. Same as yours? I used his last name in the letter. Thought it might make me seem more respectable. A bitter laugh escaped her. Stupid, I know. What's your real name? Eleanor Hayes. Eleanor Hayes. He said it slowly, like he was testing it. All right. Now I know who you really are. And? She braced herself for rejection, and nothing changes. Eleanor's breath caught. What? You think you're the only person who's made mistakes? The only one who's been hurt by someone they trusted? Weston moved back to the table but didn't sit. I came back from the war with a head full of bad memories and a letter waiting that said the woman I was going to marry had found someone else. Someone who didn't have nightmares. Someone who hadn't seen what I'd seen. His voice was flat, factual. She didn't even have the decency to wait until I got home. Just sent a letter to camp. I'm sorry. Don't be. She did me a favor, showed me what kind of woman she was before I made the mistake of marrying her. He met Eleanor's eyes. Point is, we've both been betrayed by people we trusted. Difference is, you're telling me the truth now instead of hiding it. That matters. But I'm ruined, damaged. I might not be able to... Stop. The word was gentle but firm. You survived. You came all the way out here for a second chance. That's not damaged. That's strong. He pulled out his chair and sat down again. As for children, I'm not marrying you to breed stock. I'm marrying you for partnership. If we have kids someday, fine. If we don't, we'll manage. Eleanor couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was hearing. Here's what I think, Weston continued. I think Charles Whitmore is a coward who deserves to have his teeth kicked in. I think Boston society is full of hypocrites who judge women for the same things they let men get away with. And I think you got dealt a bad hand and played it the best you could. He leaned forward. But out here, none of that matters. Wyoming doesn't care about Boston scandals. What matters is whether you'll work hard, tell the truth, and stick it out when things get difficult. What if I can't? What if you can? He stood up. Look, you're exhausted. You've had a hell of a day. We both need sleep, and this conversation's getting too heavy for tonight. How about this? You take a few days to rest up and get your bearings. See what ranch life looks like. Then we'll talk about marriage when you're thinking straight. He headed for the door. I'll be in the barn if you need anything. There's a bell on the porch. Ring it if there's trouble. Eleanor watched him go. This strange man who just listened to her deepest shame and responded with basic human decency. The door closed softly behind him, and she sat alone in the firelight, trying to understand what had just happened. She'd told the truth, the whole ugly truth, and he hadn't sent her away. She didn't know what to do with that. Eventually, exhaustion won. Eleanor went into the bedroom, a simple space with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the prairie. Her trunk sat at the foot of the bed. She opened it and found her nightgown, then changed in the dim light from the other room. The bed was harder than anything she'd slept on in Boston, but when she lay down, her body melted into it with relief. Through the window, she could see stars, more stars than she'd ever imagined existed, scattered across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds on black velvet. This was Wyoming. This was her new life, if she was brave enough to take it. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled. The sound should have frightened her, but somehow it didn't. It just sounded lonely, looking for something in all that darkness. She knew exactly how it felt. Eleanor closed her eyes and, for the first time in months, fell asleep without crying. Chakat. The sun was already high when Eleanor woke, disoriented and cotton-mouthed. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory flooded back. Wyoming, the ranch, Weston. She'd told him everything, and he hadn't sent her away. The house was quiet. Eleanor got up, washed her face in the basin on the dresser, and dressed in the same brown wool she'd worn yesterday. Her trunk held 2 other dresses, both equally practical, equally drab. The beautiful things she'd owned in her old life were long gone, sold to pay for food and rent. She didn't miss them. Pretty dresses hadn't protected her from anything that mattered. The main room was empty, but there was coffee still warm on the stove and a plate covered with a cloth. Eleanor lifted it to find biscuits, bacon, and scrambled eggs. A note in that same blunt handwriting, "Eat. I'm checking fence lines. Back by noon. W." Eleanor sat down and ate slowly, looking around the house in daylight. It was sparse but clean. The furniture was handmade, rough but sturdy. The stone fireplace dominated one wall. A few books sat on a shelf, practical volumes about ranching, animal husbandry, irrigation. No novels, no poetry. This was a house built for function, not comfort. But there was potential here. With some work, some care, it could be a home. If she stayed. After breakfast, Eleanor explored. The ranch looked different in daylight, bigger, rougher, more real. The barn was well built, housing 2 horses and equipment she couldn't begin to name. Split-rail fences marked pastures where cattle grazed. Beyond that, nothing but prairie rolling away to distant mountains. So much space. So much silence. In Boston, you were never alone. Never truly quiet. There were always voices, footsteps, the rumble of carriages. Here, the silence was so complete it almost had weight. Eleanor walked to the edge of the yard where civilization ended and wilderness began. The grass moved in waves like water. Somewhere out there, Weston was checking fence lines, doing the endless work of keeping this place running. He'd done it alone for 3 years. She thought about what he'd said last night, about partnership, about not needing a love match, just someone who'd work beside him. It should have sounded cold, but somehow it didn't. It sounded honest. Eleanor was so tired of pretty lies. She went back inside and looked around with new eyes. The floor needed sweeping. The dishes from breakfast needed washing. The windows were grimy with dust. Small things. The kind of work she'd done at the boarding house just to earn her keep. She could do small things. Eleanor found a broom in the corner and started sweeping. The rhythm was soothing. Push, gather, push, gather. Dust motes danced in the sunlight coming through the windows. She swept the entire main room, then moved to the bedroom, then started on the dishes. She was elbow-deep in dishwater when the door opened. "You don't have to do that," Weston said. Eleanor turned. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable, like he'd caught her doing something wrong. "I know," she said, "but the dishes needed doing, and I needed something to occupy myself." He came in, set his hat on a peg by the door. "You sleep all right?" "Better than I have in months, actually." "Good." He moved to the stove, poured himself coffee. "I've been thinking about what you said last night." Eleanor's stomach clenched. Here it came, the rejection she'd been expecting. "I want to propose something," Weston continued. "A trial period. You stay here for 2 weeks, see what ranch life is really like. I'll sleep in the barn, keep things proper. You can help with the work if you want, or just rest and get your strength back. At the end of 2 weeks, we both decide, do we want to make this marriage happen, or do I buy you a ticket to wherever you want to go next? Just like that? Just like that. No pressure, no obligation beyond giving it an honest try. He looked at her over his coffee cup. But I need you to promise me something. What? If you decide to leave, you tell me to my face. No running off in the middle of the night, no letters delivered after you're gone. Whatever you decide, you say it straight. Eleanor thought of the letter that had shattered Weston's world while he was at war. Thought of Charles, who'd never had the courage to face her after he was done using her. I promise, she said. Whatever I decide, I'll tell you face to face. Then we have a deal. He held out his hand. Eleanor wiped her wet hands on her skirt and shook. His grip was firm, calloused, honest. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks. And somehow, standing in that rough kitchen, shaking hands with a stranger who'd offered her more decency than anyone in Boston, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt since before Charles destroyed her life. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she had a future after all. The first morning of Eleanor's trial period, she woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood. The rhythmic thunk, thunk, thunk pulled her from sleep more effectively than any alarm clock ever had. She lay there for a moment, disoriented by how quiet everything else was. No street vendors, no carriages rattling past, just that steady chopping and the wind moving through the grass outside. She dressed quickly and went to the window. Weston was behind the house, splitting firewood with mechanical efficiency. He'd already built a respectable pile. His shirt was dark with sweat despite the early hour, and he moved like a man who'd done this particular task about 1,000 times before. Eleanor watched him work, struck by how different this was from anything she'd known. The men in Boston had soft hands and paid other people to do physical labor. Weston's entire existence seemed to be physical labor, building, mending, chopping, hauling, endless work just to keep the ranch functioning. She went outside. The morning air was cooler than she'd expected, crisp in a way that made her lungs feel clean. Weston saw her and stopped mid-swing. Morning, there's coffee on the stove. I saw. Thank you. She came closer, picking her way across the uneven ground. How long have you been up? Couple hours. Stock needs feeding before dawn. He set the axe down and wiped his face with his sleeve. You don't have to be up this early. You're supposed to be resting. I've rested enough. What can I do to help? He studied her for a moment, like he was trying to figure out if she meant it. You know how to feed chickens? No, but I can learn. Something that might have been approval crossed his face. Come on then, I'll show you. The chicken coop was a small structure behind the barn, and the chickens inside were loud, pushy, and completely unconcerned with Eleanor's lack of experience. Weston showed her how to scatter the feed, how to check for eggs, how to avoid getting pecked by the aggressive brown hen he called Bertha. She's mean, Eleanor said, pulling her hand back quickly as Bertha lunged. She's protective, lost half her clutch to a fox last spring, been angry ever since. He reached past Eleanor and scooped Bertha up with practiced ease. The hen squawked indignantly but didn't fight him. Sometimes mean just means hurt. Eleanor thought about that while she gathered eggs into the basket Weston had given her. 12 eggs, brown and still warm. Such a simple thing, but there was something satisfying about it. Tangible proof that she'd done something useful. They worked through the morning in a pattern that would become familiar over the next 2 weeks. Weston showed her tasks, explained what needed doing and why, then let her try. He didn't hover or criticize, just corrected when necessary and moved on to the next thing. By noon, Eleanor had fed chickens, gathered eggs, learned to pump water from the well without soaking herself, and discovered that mucking out horse stalls was exactly as unpleasant as it sounded. You're doing fine, Weston said when they stopped for lunch. He'd made sandwiches from yesterday's bread, and some dried beef that was better than it had any right to be. Better than I expected, honestly. What did you expect? Most city women take one look at the work and decide frontier life isn't for them. He bit into his sandwich. Thought you might do the same. I'm not most city women. Eleanor flexed her hands, already feeling blisters forming. Besides, this isn't harder than scrubbing floors at the boarding house, just different. You scrubbed floors? Among other things, turned out ruined women don't get to be particular about work. She said it matter-of-factly, but Weston's jaw tightened. That bastard should have been horsewhipped. Probably, but he wasn't, and I survived anyway. She finished her sandwich and stood up. What's next? He looked at her with something like respect. You sure you don't want to rest? You're not used to this kind of work. I'll rest when I'm actually tired. Right now I'm just here. I might as well be useful. All right then, let's check the vegetable garden. If we're going to feed 2 people through winter, it needs attention. The garden was behind the house, a plot of land surrounded by chicken wire to keep out rabbits and deer. It was a mess. Weeds had taken over half of it, and what vegetables remained looked straggly and neglected. I meant to keep up with it, Weston said, sounding almost embarrassed. But there's only so many hours in a day, and the stock comes first. Eleanor knelt in the dirt, examining what was there. Tomatoes, beans, squash, some herbs she didn't recognize. The soil was good, rich and dark. The plants just needed care. I can do this, she said. I helped with the garden at the school back home. Back in Boston, I mean. Home. She'd called Boston home without thinking, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Maybe it never really had. You sure? I'm sure. You go do whatever else needs doing. I'll work on this. Weston hesitated, like he wanted to argue, then nodded. Holler if you need anything. I'll be in the barn working on that broken harness. Eleanor spent the afternoon in the garden, and it was the most peaceful she'd felt in months. There was something meditative about pulling weeds, about coaxing struggling plants back to health. The work was repetitive, mindless, in a way that let her thoughts drift without getting caught in the dark spirals they usually found. The sun was starting to sink when Weston came back to find her still working, dirt under her nails and sweat on her forehead. You've been at this for hours, he said. I wanted to finish this section. Eleanor sat back on her heels, surveying her work. Half the garden was weeded now, the plants looking visibly happier. It's coming along. You're going to be sore tomorrow. Probably, but look, the tomatoes are already perking up. Weston smiled. Actually smiled, not just that almost expression he usually wore. It transformed his face, made him look younger and less guarded. You did good work here. Thank you. The praise warmed something in Eleanor's chest that had been cold for a long time. You're welcome. They walked back to the house together, and Weston started dinner while Eleanor washed up at the pump. She caught a glimpse of herself in the small mirror by the door and barely recognized the woman looking back. Her face was sunburned, her hair was coming loose from its bun, and there was dirt smudged on her cheek. She looked alive. Actually alive, not just going through the motions of existing. Dinner was beef stew, thick and hearty, with biscuits Weston had somehow found time to make. They ate in comfortable silence, both too tired for much conversation. Afterward, Eleanor helped clean up, and they sat on the porch as darkness fell. The stars came out one by one, then all at once, like someone had lit 1,000,000 candles overhead. Eleanor had never seen anything like it. In Boston, the city lights drowned out all but the brightest stars. Here, the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. It's beautiful, she said softly. Gets old after a while. You stop noticing. Weston was quiet for a moment. But yeah, it is. A coyote howled in the distance, and another answered. The sound didn't frighten Eleanor anymore. It just seemed like part of the landscape, like the wind in the grass. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. Why did you really advertise for a wife? The truth this time, not just the practical reasons. Weston didn't answer right away. He stared out at the darkness, and Eleanor thought maybe she'd pushed too far. Then he spoke. After the war, I couldn't be around people. Crowds made me jumpy. Loud noises worse. I'd wake up at night thinking I was back in camp, hearing artillery. His voice was flat, controlled. Everyone said it would pass. Give it time. But it didn't pass. It just changed shape. Eleanor waited, not pushing. I came out here because it was empty. Because I could work until I was too exhausted to dream. Because nobody here knew what I'd seen or what I'd done, and they didn't ask questions. He glanced at her. Built this place with my own hands. Every board, every fence post. Thought if I could build something solid, maybe I could feel solid too. Did it work? Some, but after 3 years, I realized I was just existing, not living. The ranch ran fine, the cattle bred, the crops grew, but I'd go weeks without talking to anyone except my horses. He shook his head. That's no kind of life. So I thought maybe a partner would help, someone to share the work with, someone to remind me I'm still human. The honesty in his words made Eleanor's throat tight. I understand that. Feeling like you're just existing. I mean, after Charles, after everything fell apart, I spent months just trying to get from one day to the next. It wasn't living, it was just surviving. And now? Eleanor thought about the garden, the chickens, the simple satisfaction of eggs in a basket. Now, I'm not sure yet, but this feels different. It feels like maybe I could actually build something instead of just holding broken pieces together. Then we're in the same place. Weston stood up. I should let you get some rest. You worked hard today. Weston? He turned back. Thank you for giving me this chance, for not judging me. Nothing to judge. You made a mistake trusting the wrong person. That's not a character flaw. That's just being human. He headed toward the barn, then paused. Besides, you pulled more weeds today than I've managed in 2 months. Figure I'm getting the better end of this deal. Eleanor watched him disappear into the darkness, then sat alone on the porch for a while longer, listening to the night sounds of Wyoming. Somewhere out there, the prairie went on forever. And for the first time since her world had collapsed, Eleanor didn't feel like she was drowning in it. She felt like maybe she could breathe. The next few days fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Eleanor woke early, helped with the morning chores, then spent her afternoons working on different projects around the ranch. The garden became hers completely. She weeded, watered, tied up plants that needed support. Under her care, the vegetables began to thrive. Weston taught her to ride, putting her on a gentle mare named Daisy, who seemed to understand that Eleanor had no idea what she was doing. The first time Eleanor managed to stay on while Daisy trotted, she laughed out loud, a sound that startled both her and Weston. You all right? He asked, concern in his voice. I'm fine. I can't remember the last time I laughed. She patted Daisy's neck. It felt strange. The good kind of strange, or the bad kind? The good kind, I think. She fell off Daisy twice that week, both times landing hard enough to knock the wind out of her. The second time, Weston helped her up with barely concealed amusement. You're supposed to stay on the horse, he said. I'm aware. Eleanor brushed dirt off her skirt. Daisy has different ideas. Daisy's testing you. She does it with everyone new. You get back on and show her you're not scared, she'll respect you. Eleanor looked at the mare, who was munching grass and looking entirely too pleased with herself. What if I am scared? Then you get back on anyway. That's how you stop being scared. Eleanor climbed back into the saddle, and Daisy behaved perfectly for the rest of the ride. When they got back to the barn, Weston showed her how to unsaddle and brush down the horse properly. You're learning fast, he said, watching her work. I have a good teacher. Eleanor ran the brush along Daisy's flank, though I suspect the horse is doing most of the teaching. Horses usually do. He leaned against the stall door. Listen, I need to ride out to the north pasture tomorrow. Check on the cattle up there. It's a full day's ride. You going to be all right here alone? The question surprised her. I think so. What do I need to do? Just the morning chores, feed the chickens and horses, collect eggs, make sure nothing's on fire. He smiled slightly. Think you can manage that without burning the place down? I'll do my best. Eleanor paused in her brushing. Have you always been alone when you do these trips? Yeah, why? Just seems lonely, that's all. Weston's expression softened. It is. But that's ranch life. A lot of things you do alone, whether you want to or not. That night, Eleanor lay in bed thinking about what he'd said. Weston had chosen this life deliberately, built it with his own hands, and yet he'd been lonely enough to advertise for a wife in a newspaper. The contradiction bothered her until she realized there was no contradiction. He hadn't been running from people. He'd been running from the version of himself that came back from the war. She understood that better than she wanted to admit. The next morning, Weston left before dawn. Eleanor heard him moving around, heard the horse being saddled, heard him ride off into the darkness. Then silence. She got up and did the chores exactly as he'd taught her. The chickens were their usual pushy selves. Bertha tried to peck her, missed, and settled for glaring instead. Eleanor collected 9 eggs, fed the horses, pumped water for the garden. Simple tasks, but they felt important. Like she was holding down the fort. By mid-morning, the quiet started to feel oppressive. Eleanor had gotten used to Weston being around even when they weren't talking. His presence was steady, grounding. Without him, the ranch felt too big and too empty. She worked in the garden to distract herself, but her mind kept drifting. What if something happened to him out there? What if his horse went lame, or he got hurt, or any of 100 other things went wrong? Nobody would know. She certainly wouldn't be able to help. Stop it, she said out loud. He's been doing this alone for 3 years. He doesn't need you worrying. but she worried anyway. She made herself lunch, bread and cheese, an apple from the small orchard behind the house, ate it on the porch, watching the prairie ripple in the wind. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. Eleanor watched it for a long time, envying its freedom. The afternoon dragged. She cleaned the house, mended a shirt of Weston's she'd found with a torn sleeve, read from one of his ranching books without absorbing a single word. The sun seemed to move backward across the sky. When the shadows started to lengthen, Eleanor's worry transformed into something closer to fear. What if he didn't come back tonight? What if she was out here alone, with no idea what to do or where to go for help? She was standing on the porch, staring at the horizon, when she finally saw him. A dark shape moving across the prairie, resolving gradually into horse and rider. Relief flooded through her so powerfully it made her dizzy. Weston rode into the yard looking tired and dusty. He dismounted stiffly, and Eleanor saw him wince as his boots hit the ground. "You're hurt," she said, coming down the steps. "Just sore. Long day in the saddle." He started to unsaddle the horse, moving slower than usual. "Let me help." "I can manage." "I know you can, but you don't have to." Eleanor reached for the saddle before he could argue. It was heavier than she expected, but she managed to lift it down without dropping it. "See? I'm useful." Weston looked like he wanted to argue, then thought better of it. "All right, thank you." They worked together to settle the horse, and Eleanor noticed Weston was favoring his left leg. "What happened?" she asked. "Horse stumbled going down a ravine, threw me into a rock." He shrugged like it was nothing. "Could have been worse." "How bad is it?" "Just bruised. I'll be fine." Back at the house, Eleanor heated water and made him sit while she cleaned the scrape on his leg that he'd been pretending didn't exist. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't nothing either. A deep bruise was already forming, and the skin was torn in a few places. "You should have said something," she said, dabbing at the wound with a clean cloth. "Didn't want you to fuss." "Well, I'm fussing anyway. Hold still." Weston watched her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. When she finished bandaging the scrape, he spoke quietly. "You were worried about me." It wasn't a question. Eleanor felt her face heat. "Of course I was worried. You were gone all day, and I had no way of knowing if something had happened. I've been making these trips alone for 3 years." "I know that. Doesn't mean I can't worry now that I'm here." She stood up, suddenly feeling defensive. "If that's a problem..." "It's not a problem." Weston's voice was soft. "It's just been a long time since anyone worried about me. Forgot what it felt like." Eleanor met his eyes and saw something vulnerable there, something that matched the ache in her own chest. "Well, get used to it. If we're going to be partners, that means worrying about each other." "Is that what we are? Partners?" The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor thought about the last week, working beside him, learning from him, slowly building something that felt almost like trust. "I think we might be," she said. "Or at least we're getting there." Weston nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think you're right." That night, they made dinner together. Weston showed Eleanor how to make cornbread in the cast-iron skillet, and she only burned it a little. They ate on the porch again, watching the stars come out. "You got through the day all right?" Weston asked. "I did. The chores got done. Nothing caught fire. I'd call that a success." "Any problems?" Eleanor hesitated. "Just the quiet. It's very quiet out here when you're alone. Gets to everyone eventually. Some people can't stand it. Just drives them back to town." He glanced at her. "How about you?" "I don't know yet. Ask me when I've been here longer than a week." "Fair enough." He was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you were here when I got back." House felt different, less empty. Eleanor's chest tightened with something warm and unfamiliar. "I'm glad I was here too." The second week started with a challenge. Eleanor woke to find Weston already up and clearly in pain, though he was trying to hide it. The bruise on his leg had darkened overnight, and he was limping badly. "You need to rest," Eleanor said. "Can't. Stock needs tending." "Then I'll do it." He looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. "You don't know how." "Then tell me how." "Walk me through it. I've been watching you for a week. I can handle the basics." "Eleanor." "Weston, you can barely walk. Let me help." She crossed her arms. "That's what partners do, right? Help when the other one's hurt?" He wanted to argue. She could see it in his face, but the pain won out. "All right, but I'm supervising." "Fine. Supervise from the porch where you can keep that leg elevated." Eleanor managed the morning chores with Weston, calling instructions from his perch on the porch steps. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, mucked stalls, and pumped water. It took her twice as long as it took Weston, and she made mistakes, but she got it done. When she came back to the house, sweaty and tired, Weston was looking at her with something like amazement. "You actually did it," he said. "Did you think I couldn't? I thought you might give up halfway through. Most people would have." "I'm not most people." Eleanor poured herself water from the pitcher on the porch. "Besides, someone's got to keep this place running while you heal up. It's just a bruise. It's a bad bruise. You need to stay off it for a couple days." She sat down beside him. "Which means I need to learn to do more." Over the next 2 days, with Weston's reluctant supervision, Eleanor took over the ranch. She learned to properly muck stalls, to check the horses for injuries, to spot when the chickens were acting strange. She burned herself on the stove, got kicked by a cow, and somehow managed to lose an entire bucket of water between the pump and the garden. But she kept going. Weston watched it all from the porch, unable to hide his surprise. "You're stubborn," he said on the second evening. "I prefer determined." Same thing, really. He flexed his leg, testing it. The bruise was starting to fade, and he was moving more easily. "You've done good work these past few days, better than good." "Thank you." Eleanor settled onto the steps beside him. "I'm learning that I'm stronger than I thought I was." "Could have told you that the first day you showed up. Anyone who survives what you survived and still has the guts to start over somewhere new, that's strength." Eleanor looked at him, this man who'd given her a second chance without asking for anything impossible in return. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Haven't stopped you yet." "The war, what you said about the nightmares, do you still have them?" Weston was quiet for so long Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Sometimes. Not as bad as they used to be. Building the ranch helped. Gave me something to focus on besides the bad memories." "What do you dream about?" "You don't want to know." "Maybe I do. Maybe I want to understand." He turned to look at her fully. "Why?" "Because if we're going to be partners, if we're going to get married, I should know what you're carrying, just like you know what I'm carrying." Weston's jaw worked. Then he spoke, his voice low. "I dream about the men I killed, the ones I saw die. My best friend bleeding out in my arms because a cannonball tore him in half, and there was nothing I could do but watch." He swallowed hard. "I dream about being back in camp, waiting for the next battle, knowing some of us won't come back. And I dream about the noise, the constant noise. Artillery, rifles, men screaming. Sometimes I wake up and I can still hear it." Eleanor reached over and took his hand. His fingers were rough, scarred, trembling slightly. "I'm sorry you went through that. A lot of men went through worse. A lot of men didn't come home at all. That doesn't make what you experienced any less real." She squeezed his hand. "And for what it's worth, I think you're brave. Not because you fought in the war, but because you kept going after." Weston looked at their joined hands like he wasn't quite sure what to do with the contact, but he didn't pull away. "You want to know something? Having you here this week, having someone to talk to, someone who actually listens, it's helped. The dreams haven't come as much." "Good. That's good." They sat together on the porch as the sun set, hands still clasped, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to black. And Eleanor realized that at some point during the past 2 weeks, something had shifted. She wasn't here on trial anymore. She wasn't waiting to see if she could handle frontier life. She was home. On the 14th day, the last day of their agreed trial period, Eleanor woke before dawn and lay in bed, listening to Weston moving around the house. Today was decision day. Today they both had to say whether they wanted to move forward with the marriage or part ways. Eleanor already knew her answer. She'd known it for days, maybe since that night on the porch when Weston had trusted her with his nightmares. But knowing her own answer didn't tell her what Weston would say. What if he'd changed his mind? What if 2 weeks of watching her struggle through chores had convinced him she wasn't cut out for this life? She got dressed and went out to find Weston making breakfast. Eggs and bacon, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. "Morning," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Morning." Eleanor poured herself coffee. "So, it's been 2 weeks. Yeah, it has." He flipped the eggs with more concentration than the task required. "You been thinking about what you want to do?" "Have you?" "Asked you first." Eleanor took a breath. This was it. Time to be honest, even if it meant risking rejection again. I want to stay. I want to marry you and make this work. Weston went very still. Then he turned off the stove and faced her. You sure? This isn't an easy life, you've seen that. I'm sure. I'm not saying it'll be easy. I know there'll be hard days and times when I'll want to quit. But I also know I feel more alive here than I have in years, and I think we work well together. She met his eyes. So, yes, I'm sure. The tension in Weston's shoulders eased. Good, that's good, because I want you to stay too. Really? Really? You're the best partner I could have asked for. You work hard, you don't complain, and you're honest even when it's hard. He came closer. And maybe this is more than I should say, but I like having you here. The house feels like a home now instead of just a place to sleep. Eleanor's eyes burned with tears, but for once they were happy tears. So we're doing this? We're really getting married? If you'll have me. Weston held out his hand. Partners? Partners. Eleanor shook his hand, then surprised both of them by stepping forward and hugging him. He stiffened for a second, clearly not used to being hugged. Then his arms came around her tentative but warm, and he held her like she was something precious. Thank you, Eleanor whispered, for giving me a second chance. Thank you for taking it. Weston's voice was rough. Now let's eat breakfast before it gets cold. We can ride into town this afternoon and talk to the preacher about a wedding. They ate breakfast with a new ease between them, the decision made and the future decided. Eleanor felt lighter than she had in months, maybe years. This wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself back in Boston. It was harder, rougher, with no guarantees and plenty of risks. But it was hers, and for the first time since Charles destroyed her old life, Eleanor felt like she had something worth fighting for. After breakfast, they rode to Willow Creek together. Eleanor on Daisy, who'd decided to behave herself, and Weston on his gelding. The ride took 2 hours, and they spent most of it in comfortable silence, just two people heading to town with a shared purpose. Willow Creek looked the same as it had 2 weeks ago, but Eleanor felt completely different. She wasn't arriving in tears this time. She was arriving as a woman who'd made her choice and knew her own mind. People stared, of course. They'd probably been gossiping about her for the entire 2 weeks. Eleanor didn't care. Let them talk. She'd survived worse than frontier gossip. The preacher was a weathered man named Reverend Collins, who looked like he'd been in Wyoming longer than the mountains. He listened to their request without judgment, asked a few practical questions, and agreed to marry them the following Saturday. That gives folks time to prepare if they want to attend, he said, though I suspect most will come just for the spectacle. Let them, Weston said. We're getting married either way. They left the church and stopped at the general store for supplies. Mrs. Fletcher was there, of course, her eyes lighting up when she saw them. Well, the mail-order bride decided to stay after all. Her voice dripped with false sweetness. How surprising. Eleanor smiled pleasantly. Not surprising at all, Mrs. Fletcher. Weston and I suit each other quite well. Is that so? And here I thought you'd run back to Boston with your tail between your legs after a week of real work. Turns out, I'm tougher than I look. Eleanor picked up a bag of flour. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a household to run. She walked past Mrs. Fletcher with her head high, and she could feel Weston's approval even without looking at him. They finished their shopping and loaded the supplies into the wagon. As they were leaving town, Weston spoke. You handled her well. I've dealt with worse than small-town gossips. Eleanor settled onto the wagon seat. Besides, she doesn't matter. None of them matter. The only people whose opinions I care about are yours and mine. Good philosophy. Weston snapped the reins and the horses started moving. Stick with that, and you'll do fine out here. The ride back to the ranch was peaceful. The afternoon sun was warm but not oppressive, and the prairie stretched out around them in rolling waves of grass. Eleanor found herself looking at it all with new eyes. This was going to be her home, this land, this sky, this hard, beautiful country. She was ready for it. That night, they celebrated their decision with a dinner that was slightly fancier than usual. Weston had bought steaks in town, and Eleanor had found wild onions near the creek to cook with them. They ate on the porch again, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. 1 week until we're married, Weston said. 1 week? Eleanor sipped her coffee. Are you nervous? Little bit. You? Terrified, actually. He looked at her surprised. Why? Because the last time I trusted a man, it destroyed my life. And even though I know you're different, even though I trust you as much as I can trust anyone right now, there's still that fear. Eleanor set down her cup. What if I'm wrong again? What if this doesn't work? What if I'm making another huge mistake? Weston was quiet for a long moment. Then, I can't promise you it'll be perfect. Can't even promise it'll be easy. But I can promise I won't lie to you, won't abandon you, and won't make you regret taking this chance. He met her eyes. And if you wake up one day and realize you can't do this anymore, I won't trap you here. You'll always have the choice to leave. I don't want to leave. I know, but I need you to know you could if you needed to. You're choosing this freely, Eleanor. That matters. The knot of fear in Eleanor's chest loosened slightly. This was why she trusted him, because he understood that real trust had to include the freedom to walk away. Thank you for saying that. Just the truth. Weston stood up and stretched. Come on. I'll teach you to shoot tomorrow, and you're going to need a good night's sleep for that. Shoot? As in guns? Can't live out here and not know how to shoot. What if something tries to get the chickens? Or worse? He grinned at her shocked expression. Don't worry, you'll be fine. Probably. Eleanor threw a balled-up napkin at him, and he laughed. An actual, genuine laugh that made him look years younger. And despite her fear, despite everything that could go wrong, Eleanor felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope. Real, solid hope for the future. The rifle was heavier than Eleanor expected, and holding it made her hands shake for reasons that had nothing to do with the weight. You're gripping it too tight, Weston said from behind her. Relax your shoulders. I'm holding a weapon that could kill someone. Relaxing seems counterproductive. It's a tool, like an axe or a hammer. Respect it, but don't be afraid of it. He moved closer, adjusting her stance. Feet shoulder width apart. Good. Now bring the stock up to your shoulder, firm but not jammed in there. You want to absorb the recoil, not fight it. Eleanor did as he instructed, trying to ignore how aware she was of his proximity. They'd been living in the same house for 2 weeks, but this was different. This was intentional closeness, his hands guiding hers, his voice low and patient in her ear. See those cans on the fence post? He pointed to 3 tin cans he'd set up about 30 yards away. Start with the one on the left. Line up the sight. Take a breath. Let half of it out, then squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Squeeze. Eleanor focused on the can, lined up the sight, took a breath, let half out, squeezed. The rifle kicked back harder than she'd anticipated, slamming into her shoulder and nearly knocking her backward. The shot went wide, hitting dirt several feet to the right of the fence. Ow! Eleanor lowered the rifle, rubbing her shoulder. You didn't mention it would try to dislocate my arm. That's why I said firm against your shoulder, not loose. Try again. This time really seat it. It took Eleanor 6 shots before she finally hit a can, and when she did, the metallic ping was one of the most satisfying sounds she'd ever heard. I did it. She turned to Weston, grinning. Did you see that? I saw. He was smiling too, that rare full smile that transformed his whole face. Not bad for a Boston schoolteacher. Former Boston schoolteacher. The correction came out before she could stop it. I'm a rancher's wife now, or I will be in 6 days. Something flickered across Weston's face. Pleasure, maybe, or satisfaction. Yeah, you will be. They spent another hour practicing until Eleanor could hit the cans with reasonable consistency. Her shoulder was going to be one massive bruise tomorrow, but she felt accomplished in a way that had nothing to do with gardens or chickens. This was a skill that might actually save her life one day. Same time tomorrow? Weston asked as they walked back to the house. Absolutely. I want to get good enough that I don't have to think about it. That takes time. But you're learning faster than I expected. Eleanor bumped his shoulder with hers. You keep saying that. When are you going to stop underestimating me? Probably never. Keeps me on my toes. He held the door open for her. How about you make dinner tonight, and I'll see if I can't make that dress situation a little less dire. Eleanor stopped. What dress situation? The one where you're getting married in 6 days and you only own 3 dresses, all of which look like they've been through a war. Heat crept up Eleanor's neck. They're practical, and I can't afford... Didn't ask if you could afford it. Asked if you wanted me to ride to town tomorrow and see what the seamstress has available. Weston's expression was carefully neutral. Call it a wedding gift. Pride and gratitude warred in Eleanor's chest. She'd been trying not to think about the wedding itself, about standing in front of the whole town in a dress that barely qualified as decent. But accepting charity still felt wrong, even from the man she was about to marry. I can't ask you to do that. You didn't ask. I offered. There's a difference. He moved past her into the house. Besides, you're going to be my wife. That means what's mine is yours. Might as well start getting used to it now. Eleanor followed him inside, her throat tight. Weston, he turned. Thank you. For everything. For treating me like I matter. You do matter. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Now go make dinner before I change my mind about that dress. The next morning, Weston rode to town while Eleanor stayed behind to work on the ranch. She was getting confident enough with the daily tasks that being alone didn't feel overwhelming anymore. The chickens knew her now. Even Bertha had stopped trying to draw blood every time Eleanor reached for an egg. She was in the garden tying up tomato plants when she heard hoofbeats. Weston couldn't be back already. He'd only left 2 hours ago. Eleanor straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a rider approaching from the direction of town. Not Weston. A woman on a bay mare, riding with the kind of confidence that spoke of years in the saddle. Eleanor's stomach clenched. Company. The one thing she hadn't had to deal with yet. The woman dismounted near the house, and Eleanor got a better look at her. Mid-30s probably, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. She wore men's trousers and a worn shirt, and there was a rifle in her saddle scabbard. You must be Eleanor, the woman called out. I'm Sarah Chen. My husband and I have the ranch about 8 miles east of here. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and came forward. It's nice to meet you. Sarah's eyes were sharp, assessing. Not unkind, but not warm either. Weston stopped by our place on his way to town. Asked if I'd check in on you while he was gone. Make sure you hadn't been eaten by coyotes or anything equally dramatic. I'm managing fine. I can see that. Garden looks good. Better than it has in years, actually. Sarah tied her horse to the porch rail. But Weston was right to ask. Being alone out here takes some getting used to. Eleanor bristled slightly at the implication that she couldn't handle herself. I've been alone before. Not like this, you haven't. Sarah's tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. City alone and frontier alone are two different animals. One's got neighbors within shouting distance. The other's got you and the wind and whatever decides to wander onto your property. It was hard to argue with that. Eleanor gestured to the porch. Would you like some water? Coffee? Water would be good. It's a hot ride. They sat on the porch steps, and Eleanor brought out the pitcher and 2 cups. Sarah drank deeply, then studied Eleanor with that same assessing gaze. So, you're really going through with it? Marrying Weston? I am, this Saturday. Quick courtship. We have an understanding. That's enough. Sarah made a non-committal sound. You know what you're getting into? Weston's a good man, don't get me wrong, but he's not easy. The war changed him. Some days he's fine. Other days he's somewhere else entirely, and there's nothing you can do but wait for him to come back. Eleanor thought about Weston's confession about the nightmares, about the men he'd watched die. He told me about the war. Did he? Sarah looked genuinely surprised. That's something. Weston doesn't talk about it with most people. My husband fought in the same regiment. They both came back different. How do you manage? Eleanor asked. When he's having a bad day? You give him space when he needs it. You stay close when he needs that instead. And you learn to tell the difference, which takes time. Sarah set down her cup. But mostly, you remember it's not about you. Whatever he's fighting, it's his battle. You can support him, but you can't fix him. The word settled heavy in Eleanor's chest. What if I can't help him? You can't help him by trying to fix him. You help by just being there, by not leaving when it gets hard. Sarah's expression softened slightly. Look, I'm not trying to scare you off. I just want you to know what you're walking into. Frontier life is hard enough without adding trauma to the mix. I have my own trauma, Eleanor said quietly. Maybe that makes us even. Maybe it does. Sarah stood up. I should get back. But if you need anything, and I mean anything, our ranch is 8 miles east. You ride straight toward those mountains you can see from here. You'll hit it eventually. My husband's name is Marcus. We'll both help if you need it. Thank you. I appreciate that. Sarah mounted her horse with easy grace. One more thing. Mrs. Fletcher and her crowd are going to talk. They're probably talking right now. Best thing you can do is ignore them. They'll get bored eventually. I survived Boston society turning on me. I think I can handle Willow Creek. Good. You've got spine. You're going to need it. Sarah tipped her hat. See you at the wedding, Eleanor. Eleanor watched her ride off, feeling oddly reassured. Sarah hadn't coddled her or pretended frontier life was anything other than what it was. That honesty felt like respect. Weston returned late in the afternoon, looking pleased with himself. He carried a wrapped bundle into the house and set it on the table. The seamstress had something she thought would work, he said. If it doesn't fit, she can alter it before Saturday. Eleanor unwrapped the bundle with shaking hands. Inside was a dress, simple but beautiful, made of deep blue cotton with tiny white flowers embroidered around the collar and cuffs. It wasn't fancy by Boston standards, but it was miles better than anything Eleanor currently owned. Weston, her voice cracked. This is too much. It's a dress, for our wedding. That's not too much, that's appropriate. He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Do you like it? I love it, thank you. Eleanor held the dress up to herself, and Weston's expression changed to something warm. Blue suits you, brings out your eyes. Eleanor felt her face heat. They'd been living together for over 2 weeks, and somehow this felt more intimate than any of it. You noticed my eye color? I noticed a lot of things about you. He said it casually, but there was weight behind the words. You gonna try it on? Right now? Why not? Need to know if it fits. Eleanor took the dress into the bedroom and changed, fumbling with the buttons in her nervousness. When she finally got it on, she looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress fit perfectly, hugging her waist and falling in soft folds to the floor. She looked like someone worth marrying. She stepped out of the bedroom. Weston was standing by the window, and when he turned and saw her, he went completely still. Well? Eleanor asked, suddenly self-conscious. Does it work? Yeah. His voice was rough. It works. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, and Eleanor felt something shift between them. This was real. They were really doing this. In 5 days, they would stand in front of the whole town and promise to build a life together. The thought was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Sarah Chen came by today, Eleanor said, breaking the moment. Weston blinked. She did? What did she want? To check on me. You asked her to? Figured it wouldn't hurt to have someone nearby while I was gone. Sarah's good people. She say anything useful? She warned me about Mrs. Fletcher and about the war, about how it still affects you. Weston's jaw tightened. She had no right. She had every right. She was being honest. Eleanor moved closer. And I appreciate it. I'd rather know what to expect than be blindsided later. The nightmares aren't constant. Most nights I sleep fine. But some nights you don't. And when that happens, I need to know how to help. Eleanor reached out and took his hand. We're partners, remember? That means the hard stuff too. Weston looked down at their joined hands. You really mean that, don't you? You're not just saying it. I really mean it. Eleanor squeezed his fingers. I'm not going anywhere, Weston. Not when things get difficult. Not when you have bad days. I'm choosing this with my eyes open. Something in his expression cracked, and for a moment Eleanor saw past the careful control to the vulnerability underneath. I don't deserve you. You absolutely do, and I'm going to keep telling you that until you believe it. Weston pulled her into a hug, sudden and fierce, and Eleanor wrapped her arms around him and held on. This was new territory for both of them, trust earned through honesty instead of built on pretty lies. It was terrifying. But it was also real. And Eleanor was so tired of things that weren't real. The days before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and nervous energy. Eleanor cleaned the house until it gleamed, worked the garden until her back ached, and practiced with the rifle until her shoulder was permanently tender. Weston worked on repairs around the ranch and built furniture for the bedroom, a dresser for Eleanor's things, a wardrobe to share. You're building furniture? Eleanor asked, watching him sand a drawer front. Can't have you living out of a trunk forever. Besides, gives me something to do with my hands, keeps me from thinking too much. About what? About how I'm getting married in 3 days and I have no idea how to be a husband. Eleanor sat down on the porch step next to his workspace. I have no idea how to be a wife. So we're even. You were almost a wife once, before. That was different. Charles wanted something decorative, someone to smile and look pretty and not ask difficult questions. Eleanor watched Weston work, his hands sure and steady on the wood. You want a partner. That's completely different. You think we can do this? Actually make it work? I think we have as good a chance as anyone. Better than most, maybe, because we're not lying to each other about what we want. Weston set down the sandpaper. What do you want, Eleanor? From this marriage? From this life? What do you actually want? The question caught her off guard. Nobody had asked her that in years. Charles had certainly never asked. I want to matter. I want to build something that lasts. I want to wake up in the morning and feel like my life has purpose. She paused. And I want to feel safe. Not just physically safe, but emotionally. I want to trust that the person I'm with won't use my vulnerabilities against me. I can give you that. The safety, I mean. The rest, the mattering, the purpose, you already have that. You've changed this place in 3 weeks, made it better, made it a home. It's our home now, Eleanor said softly. Ours together. Yeah. Weston picked up the sandpaper again, but he was smiling. Yeah, it is. The night before the wedding, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through everything that could go wrong. What if she froze at the altar? What if the town's judgment became too much to bear? What if she woke up one day and realized she'd made a terrible mistake? What if Weston did? She got up and went to the window. The prairie was silvered with moonlight, beautiful and alien and vast. Somewhere out there, in the barn, Weston was probably lying awake with his own doubts. Eleanor made a decision. She pulled on her robe and slipped outside, crossing the yard to the barn. The door was slightly ajar, lamplight spilling out. Weston? She called softly. Eleanor, what are you doing out here? She pushed the door open. Weston was sitting on a hay bale, fully dressed, looking like he hadn't even tried to sleep. I could ask you the same thing. Couldn't settle, kept thinking too much. Me too. Eleanor came in and sat down beside him. Want to talk about it? Not sure there's much to say, just pre-wedding nerves, I guess. Are you having second thoughts? No? He said it firmly. You? No, but I'm terrified anyway. Of what? Eleanor pulled her robe tighter. Of failing. Of not being strong enough for this life. Of you waking up one day and realizing you made a mistake taking me on. Weston turned to face her fully. Eleanor, listen to me. The only mistake I could make is letting you leave. You're the best thing that's happened to this ranch, to me, in years. You work harder than any hired hand I've had. You don't complain. You take everything this life throws at you and you figure it out. He reached out and took her hand. I'm the one who should be worried you'll wake up and realize you could do better. Better than a man who gave me a second chance when I had nothing, who treats me like an equal instead of property, who's honest even when it's hard. Eleanor shook her head. I don't want better. I want this. I want you. The words hung in the air between them, heavier than she'd intended. This was supposed to be a practical partnership, a marriage of convenience and mutual benefit. But somewhere along the way, it had become something more. Weston's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I want you too, and that scares me because I'm not good at this, at feelings, at being what someone else needs. You're better at it than you think. Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder. Can I tell you something? Always. When I first came here, I thought marriage was something I'd have to endure, a necessary arrangement to escape Boston. But now, she lifted her head to look at him. Now I'm actually looking forward to tomorrow, to standing up in front of everyone and choosing you. Weston's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might kiss her, and her heart hammered against her ribs. But he just looked at her, his eyes dark and serious in the lamplight. Tomorrow, he said softly. We'll do this right tomorrow. Eleanor understood. He was waiting, doing things properly, treating their wedding like it mattered, because it did. Tomorrow, she agreed. They sat together in the barn until the sky started to lighten, talking about nothing and everything. About Weston's plans to expand the herd, about Eleanor's idea to start a small school for ranch children in the area. About the future they were building together, one conversation at a time. When the sun finally rose, Weston walked Eleanor back to the house. At the door, he stopped and took both her hands. I'll see you at the church, he said. You will. I'll be the one in the blue dress. I'll be the one trying not to pass out from nerves. Eleanor laughed, and then, because she could, because tomorrow she'd be his wife, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. You'll be fine. We both will. Weston's hand came up to touch the spot she'd kissed, his expression stunned. Yeah, we will. The wedding was set for 2 in the afternoon. Eleanor spent the morning in a haze of preparation, taking a bath in the tin tub Weston had hauled into the bedroom, washing her hair until it shone, putting on the blue dress with trembling hands. She had no flowers, no veil, no bridesmaids, just herself, an address, and a choice she was making freely. There was a knock on the bedroom door. Eleanor? It's Sarah Chen. Eleanor opened the door to find Sarah standing there with another woman, both of them dressed in their Sunday best. We thought you might want some company getting ready, Sarah said. This is Margaret Torres. Her husband works with Marcus sometimes. Margaret was younger than Sarah, maybe Eleanor's age, with kind eyes and a warm smile. We brought flowers from my garden. Thought you might want them for your hair. Eleanor's throat tightened. You didn't have to do that. We wanted to. Sarah came in and started fussing with Eleanor's hair. Every bride deserves flowers on her wedding day, even practical frontier brides. They worked together, pinning up Eleanor's hair and weaving small wildflowers through it. Margaret produced a ribbon that matched the dress. Sarah contributed a pair of earrings, simple silver drops. Something borrowed, she said. Bring them back when you can. By the time they finished, Eleanor looked like a proper bride. Not the elaborate Boston version she might have been in another life, but something better. Something real. Thank you, she said, her voice thick. Both of you didn't have to do this. Yes, we did, Margaret said gently. We're going to be neighbors. That means something out here. We take care of each other. They rode to town together, Eleanor on Daisy and the other two women flanking her like an honor guard. When they arrived at the church, there was already a crowd gathered. Eleanor's stomach dropped. She'd known people would come, but seeing them all there, waiting to watch her marry Weston, made it suddenly very real. Head up, Sarah murmured. Don't let them see you nervous. Eleanor straightened her spine and dismounted. The crowd parted for her and she could feel their eyes, judging, assessing, waiting to see if she'd falter. Mrs. Fletcher was there, whispering behind her hand to another woman. A group of cowboys from nearby ranches stood near the back, looking uncomfortable in clean shirts. Reverend Collins met her at the church door. Miss Hayes, you ready? As I'll ever be. Good. Mr. Hale's waiting inside. Looks like he might bolt if we don't get started soon. That surprised a laugh out of Eleanor. Then we'd better not keep him waiting. Sarah and Margaret took their places near the front. Reverend Collins offered Eleanor his arm. Shall we? Eleanor took a deep breath and nodded. The Reverend pushed open the church doors. The church was simple, rough-hewn pews and unadorned walls, but someone had brought in wildflowers that filled the air with their sweet scent. And at the front, standing stiff as a board in a clean shirt and dark trousers, was Weston. He turned when the doors opened, and his face transformed. The nervousness melted away, replaced by something that looked like awe, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. Eleanor started walking toward him, and with every step her own fear quieted. This was right. This was what she wanted, not the elaborate wedding she might have had with Charles, full of lies and pretty words. This simple ceremony in a frontier church, marrying a man who'd given her honesty and respect and a second chance. She reached Weston, and Reverend Collins stepped back. For a moment they just looked at each other. You look beautiful, Weston said quietly. You look terrified. I am terrified, but I'm here. So am I. Reverend Collins cleared his throat. Shall we begin? The ceremony was short and practical. No flowery language or elaborate promises, just the basic vows, the fundamental commitment. Weston's hands were shaking when he slid the simple gold band onto Eleanor's finger. Her own hands weren't much steadier. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Collins said. Mr. Hale, you may kiss your bride. Weston looked at Eleanor, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly and he leaned in and kissed her. It was brief, almost chaste, but Eleanor felt it down to her toes. When he pulled back, his ears were red and he looked flustered. We did it, he whispered. We did it, Eleanor agreed. They turned to face the congregation and Eleanor braced herself for judgment, but Sarah was smiling. Margaret was dabbing at her eyes. Even some of the cowboys looked pleased. Mrs. Fletcher's face was pinched with disapproval, but she was just one sour note in a chorus of general goodwill. Outside the church, people gathered to offer congratulations. Sarah hugged Eleanor tightly. Marcus Chen shook Weston's hand and clapped him on the back. Margaret pressed a jar of preserves into Eleanor's hands. For your pantry, she said. Welcome to the community, Mrs. Hale. Mrs. Hale. Eleanor was Mrs. Hale now. The name felt strange and new and right all at once. They rode back to the ranch as the sun started to set, just the two of them. Weston had tied tin cans to the back of the wagon, and they rattled and clanged the whole way home. It should have been annoying, but instead it felt celebratory. "We're married," Eleanor said, still trying to wrap her mind around it. "Yeah, we are." Weston glanced at her. "Any regrets yet?" "None." "You?" "Not a single one." At the ranch, Weston lifted Eleanor down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist. They stood there in the fading light, newly married, both of them uncertain about what came next. "I moved my things into the house," Weston said. "Into the bedroom, if that's all right." "That's more than all right. We're married now. We should share a room." "Yeah, but I don't want to assume. We can take things slow if you want." Eleanor put her hand on his chest, feeling his heart hammering underneath. "Weston, I trust you. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." He covered her hand with his. "Together. I like the sound of that." They went inside, and Eleanor lit the lamps while Weston built up the fire. The house felt different tonight, fuller somehow, even though nothing physical had changed. It was theirs now. Officially, legally, completely theirs. Weston came up behind her as she stood by the window, his arms wrapping around her waist. Eleanor leaned back against him, feeling safe and wanted and home. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For taking a chance on me. For coming all the way from Boston. For staying." His voice was rough with emotion. "For being you." Eleanor turned in his arms and looked up at him. This man who'd offered her dignity when she had nothing, who'd taught her to shoot and ride and survive, who'd trusted her with his nightmares and his hopes. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay," she said. "For seeing me as more than my mistakes." Weston cupped her face in his hands. "You were never your mistakes. You were always you, strong and stubborn and brave." He kissed her forehead. "And now you're my wife." "Now I'm your wife," Eleanor repeated, and the words felt like a vow all on their own. They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other, two broken people who'd found a way to be whole together. And outside, the Wyoming wind swept across the prairie, carrying with it the promise of all the tomorrows they'd face side by side. Eleanor Hayes was gone. In her place stood Eleanor Hale, rancher's wife, survivor, fighter. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't afraid of what came next. The first week of marriage was nothing like Eleanor had imagined marriage would be. There were no grand romantic gestures, no honeymoon trip, just the two of them settling into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural at the same time. Weston had been careful with her that first night, almost too careful, gentle in a way that made Eleanor's chest ache, like he was terrified of breaking something precious. Afterward, lying in the darkness with his arm around her waist, Eleanor had felt safe in a way she never had with Charles. This wasn't about possession or conquest. It was about trust. "You all right?" Weston had murmured into her hair. "Better than all right." Eleanor had turned in his arms to face him. "Stop worrying. Can't help it. Want to do this right." "You are doing it right. We both are." But the tenderness of those first few nights gave way quickly to the harsh reality of frontier autumn. The weather started to turn in late September, bringing cold winds that stripped the last warmth from the air. Weston spent long days preparing the ranch for winter, reinforcing the barn, stacking firewood, moving cattle to protected pastures. Eleanor threw herself into her own preparations. The garden had to be harvested before the first hard frost. She spent days picking tomatoes, digging up potatoes, pulling onions. Her hands were perpetually dirt-stained, her back constantly aching. At night, she and Weston worked side by side in the kitchen, canning vegetables by lamplight until they were both too exhausted to see straight. "How much more do we need?" Eleanor asked one night, looking at the rows of jars already filling the pantry shelves. "As much as we can put up. Winter's long out here. 6 months sometimes before you can get to town reliably." Weston was peeling potatoes with mechanical efficiency. "We run out of food in February. We're in trouble." The enormity of it hit Eleanor like a physical weight. 6 months. Half a year of being potentially cut off from the rest of the world, surviving on whatever they'd managed to store. In Boston, she could walk to a market any day of the year. Out here, winter meant isolation. "You're thinking too much," Weston said, reading her expression. "We'll be fine. I've done this before." "You've done it alone. That's different." "Yeah, it's better now. 2 of us means we can do more, store more." He smiled slightly. "And the company will help. Last winter about drove me mad talking to myself all the time." Eleanor tried to return the smile, but anxiety gnawed at her. What if she wasn't strong enough for a Wyoming winter? What if the isolation broke her? The first snow came in early October, a light dusting that melted by noon but served as a warning. Weston immediately went into overdrive, working from before dawn until after dark. Eleanor matched his pace, pushing herself harder than she ever had. The garden had to be completely cleared. The root cellar needed to be stocked. Every piece of equipment had to be checked and repaired. "You're going to work yourself sick," Sarah said when she stopped by one afternoon. She'd ridden over with fresh eggs and news from the Chen ranch. "I can see it in your face. You're exhausted. We have so much to do before the real snow hits." Eleanor was mending fence wire, her hands raw from the cold metal. "Weston says we have maybe 2 weeks." Weston's been preparing for winter his whole life. He knows what's necessary and what's just anxiety talking. Sarah helped her stretch the wire. "You need to pace yourself. Winter's a marathon, not a sprint." "I can't slow down. What if something doesn't get done and we need it later?" Sarah gave her a long look. "You're trying to prove something. To Weston? To the town? To yourself?" The question hit too close to home. Eleanor's hands stilled on the wire. "Maybe all three. Stop it. You've already proven you can handle ranch life. You've been here 2 months, you haven't complained once, and you work harder than most men I know." Sarah's voice softened. "But you're going to burn yourself out if you keep pushing this hard. And then what good are you to anyone?" Eleanor knew Sarah was right, but she couldn't seem to slow down. Every task completed was proof she belonged here. Every jar canned, every fence mended, every skill mastered was evidence that she wasn't the broken woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach in tears. That night at dinner, Weston noticed the bandages on her hands. "What happened?" He reached across the table to examine them. "Nothing, just some blisters from the fence wire." "Eleanor," his voice was gentle but firm, "you're working too hard." Says the man who was up at 4 this morning and didn't stop until full dark. "That's different. I'm used to this pace." "So I should just stand around and watch you kill yourself preparing for winter? We're partners, remember? That means I pull my weight." "You're already pulling your weight, more than your weight." Weston held her bandaged hands carefully. "But you're going to hurt yourself if you keep this up. What happens if you get seriously injured? I can't do all this and nurse you back to health." The practicality of the statement stung, even though Eleanor knew he was right. "I just want to be useful. I want to carry my share." "You are useful. You're carrying more than your share. But pushing yourself until you collapse isn't helping either of us. It's just pride." Eleanor pulled her hands back, feeling defensive. "Maybe it is pride. Is that so wrong? I spent months being treated like I was worthless. Maybe I need to prove to myself that I'm not." Weston was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up, came around the table, and pulled Eleanor to her feet. His arms came around her, holding her close. "You're not worthless," he said into her hair. "You never were, and you don't have to prove anything to me. I already know what you're capable of." Eleanor's eyes burned. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the smell of wood smoke and horses and him. "I'm scared. Of winter. Of failing. Of not being enough. You're enough. More than enough." His hand stroked her back. "And we're going to get through winter together. But that means both of us have to survive until spring. Understand?" Eleanor nodded against his chest. "I'll try to slow down." "Good. Starting now. We're done working for tonight. Let's just sit." They sat together on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars come out. Weston's arm was solid around Eleanor's shoulders, and slowly, the knot of anxiety in her chest began to loosen. "Tell me about your first winter out here," she said. Weston was quiet for so long Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "It was hard. Harder than the war in some ways, because at least in the war you had other people around. That first winter, I went 3 weeks without seeing another human being. Snow was so deep I couldn't get to town, even if I wanted to." He paused. "I talked to the horses a lot. Started having full conversations with them. Knew I was losing it when they started talking back." Despite everything, Eleanor laughed. "They talked back?" "In my head, yeah. Duke gave very good advice about fence repair." He was smiling, but there was pain under it. "That's when I realized I couldn't do this alone forever. I needed someone, even just to remind me I was still human." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "You have someone now." "Yeah, I do." He pulled her closer. "And this winter's going to be different, better." Eleanor wanted to believe that. She did believe it, mostly, but a small part of her still worried about what months of isolation would do to both of them. The first hard freeze came on October 15th. Eleanor woke to find frost patterns on the windows and ice in the water bucket. When she stepped outside to check on the chickens, her breath clouded in front of her face. Winter had arrived in earnest. The temperature dropped steadily over the next week. Weston moved the cattle closer to the ranch, penning them in the pasture nearest the barn, where they'd be easier to feed when the snow got deep. He and Eleanor spent 2 full days chopping firewood, stacking it against the house until they had a wall of split logs 6 feet high. "Is this enough?" Eleanor asked, looking at the massive pile. "It'll have to be. We run out. We'll burn furniture if we need to." The casual statement chilled Eleanor more than the weather. Burning furniture to survive. That was the reality of frontier winter. Then, 3 days before November, Margaret Torres arrived on horseback looking frantic. "We need help," she said before she'd even dismounted. "Sarah's having her baby and it's not going right. Marcus rode to town for the doctor, but the creek's too high to cross. He's trapped on the other side." Eleanor's medical knowledge was limited to basic first aid, but she didn't hesitate. "I'll come. Let me get my things." "Eleanor, wait." Weston caught her arm. "A difficult birth. You don't know what you're walking into." "A woman in trouble. That's what I'm walking into." She met his eyes. "I have to try to help." Weston's jaw worked. Then he nodded. "I'm coming with you. You're not riding alone in this weather." They rode hard to the Chen Ranch, arriving to find Sarah in the bedroom, face pale and slick with sweat. She'd been in labor for 18 hours, Margaret said. The baby wasn't coming. Eleanor had watched births before, women in the boarding house, the cook's daughter. She knew the basics. But this was different. Sarah was in real trouble, and there was no doctor, no experienced midwife, just Eleanor and Margaret and hope. "Can you help her?" Margaret whispered, tears in her eyes. Eleanor had no idea if she could, but Sarah needed someone to try, and Eleanor was all there was. "I'll do my best." The next 6 hours were the longest of Eleanor's life. Sarah screamed and pushed and bled, and Eleanor did everything she could think of, repositioned her, felt for the baby's position, talked her through the pain. Weston stayed out in the main room with Margaret's children, keeping them calm, while Margaret held Sarah's hand and prayed. When the baby finally came, blue and silent, Eleanor's heart stopped. She cleared its mouth, rubbed its back, willing it to breathe. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the baby gasped and cried, and turned from blue to pink before Eleanor's eyes. "It's a girl," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "Sarah, you have a daughter." Sarah was crying and laughing at the same time, reaching for the baby with trembling hands. Eleanor cleaned the infant quickly and placed her in Sarah's arms, then set about taking care of Sarah herself, stopping the bleeding, making her comfortable, checking for complications. By the time Marcus finally made it back with the doctor, riding the long way around the flooded creek, mother and baby were both stable. The doctor examined them both, looked at Eleanor with new respect. "You did good work here. Saved both their lives, most likely." Eleanor felt numb. She'd been operating on pure instinct and terror for hours. Now that it was over, she could barely stand. Weston found her sitting on the porch steps, shaking. He sat down beside her and pulled her against his side. "You were amazing in there," he said. "I was terrified. I had no idea what I was doing." "You saved them anyway. That's what matters." Eleanor looked at her hands, still stained with blood despite washing them. "What if I'd done something wrong? What if the baby had died?" "But she didn't, and Sarah's going to be fine because you were there." Weston kissed the top of her head. "You're stronger than you know, Eleanor Hale." They rode home as the sun was setting, both exhausted. When they reached the ranch, Eleanor went straight to the bedroom and collapsed onto the bed fully clothed. Weston pulled off her boots and covered her with a blanket, then lay down beside her. "Thank you for coming with me," Eleanor murmured. "Always. Wherever you need to go, I'm coming with you." Eleanor fell asleep with those words warming her chest, too tired to even remove her dress. Word of Sarah's baby spread quickly. Over the next week, 3 different families stopped by the ranch to thank Eleanor, bringing gifts, preserved fruit, smoked meat, hand-knitted items. Eleanor was bewildered by the attention. "I just did what anyone would do," she said to Mrs. Patterson, who'd brought a jar of honey. "Anyone didn't do it, you did. That makes you a hero to a lot of folks around here." Mrs. Patterson squeezed her hand. "We take care of our own on the frontier, and you're one of us now." The acceptance warmed Eleanor more than any fire could. She was one of them, part of the community. No longer the scandalous mail-order bride, but Eleanor Hale, who'd helped deliver Sarah Chen's baby. Even Mrs. Fletcher's attitude shifted, though she'd never admit it. When Eleanor ran into her at the general store, the older woman gave her a stiff nod. "Heard what you did for Sarah Chen. That was good work." It wasn't an apology for months of judgment, but coming from Mrs. Fletcher, it was close enough. The snow started in earnest the second week of November. Not the light dusting they'd had before, but a proper storm that buried the ranch under 8 inches overnight. Weston went out before dawn to check on the cattle and came back looking grim. "We're going to lose some. It's too cold, too fast. The weak ones won't make it." Eleanor had grown attached to the cattle over the past months. The idea of them dying in the cold made her chest ache. "Can't we bring them into the barn?" "Not all of them. There's not enough room. We do what we can and accept what we can't change. That's ranch life." The harsh pragmatism of it still caught Eleanor off guard sometimes. In Boston, you could insulate yourself from nature's cruelty. Out here, it was right in your face, unavoidable. They lost 3 calves in that first storm. Weston found them frozen in the pasture, and he and Eleanor buried them in ground that was already starting to harden with cold. Eleanor cried over them, which made Weston hold her tight. "I know it's hard, but this is part of it. Life and death, right up close. You never get used to it, but you learn to accept it." "How many winters have you done this?" 5, counting this one. Lost stock every year. It never gets easier. Eleanor looked at the small graves marked with rocks. 3 lives that had barely started, ended by weather they had no defense against. "How do you stand it?" "You remember the ones that survive. Come spring, we'll have new calves. The cycle continues." He squeezed her hand. "And this year, I don't have to face it alone. That makes it bearable." As November turned into December, the snow kept coming. Some days it fell light and lazy, other days in blinding storms that made it impossible to see more than a few feet. Weston strung a rope from the house to the barn so they could find their way in whiteout conditions. "If you ever need to go out during a storm, you hold on to this rope," he instructed Eleanor. "Don't let go for any reason. People die 10 feet from their own door because they lose their way in the snow." The isolation that had worried Eleanor became reality. They were completely cut off from town, from neighbors, from everyone. Some days the only other living things they saw were each other and the livestock. The world shrank to the ranch, the house, the space between one day and the next. Eleanor discovered that Weston had been right about one thing. Having another person made all the difference. They fell into routines that structured their days. Morning chores, breakfast, maintenance work, lunch, more work, dinner, evening by the fire. They talked more than Eleanor had ever talked to anyone, covering everything from childhood memories to philosophy to what they'd do when spring finally came. Weston taught Eleanor to play chess using a set he'd carved himself. She was terrible at it, but she kept playing anyway, enjoying the quiet concentration and the way Weston's face would light up when he saw a particularly clever move. Eleanor taught Weston to read better. He could manage the basics, but complex text defeated him. They worked through books together by firelight, Eleanor patient when he stumbled over words, Weston determined to improve. "Why didn't you learn this as a child?" Eleanor asked one night. "No school where I grew up. Pa needed me working the farm more than he needed me reading." Weston traced the words with his finger. "Taught myself enough to get by, but I always wished I'd learned proper." "Well, you're learning now, and you're doing well." They made love in those cold, dark nights, finding warmth in each other when the wind howled outside. It was different than those first tentative nights, more comfortable, more confident. Eleanor learned what made Weston shudder and sigh. He learned what made her gasp and cling to him. They discovered each other slowly, carefully, building intimacy one touch at a time. On the bad nights, when Weston woke thrashing from nightmares about the war, Eleanor learned to hold him until the terror passed. She didn't try to fix it or make it better, just stayed close until he remembered where he was, who he was with, that the war was over. "Sorry," he'd mumble, embarrassed. "Don't be. I'm here. That's what I'm here for." Eleanor had her own bad nights, times when the weight of isolation pressed down on her, when she felt like she couldn't breathe, when the memories of Boston and Charles and everything she'd lost threatened to drown her. On those nights, Weston would wrap her in blankets and hold her on the porch despite the cold, letting her see the sky and remember the world was bigger than her pain. They were healing each other, Eleanor realized. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. Christmas came and went with little fanfare. They couldn't get to town for any kind of celebration, so they made their own. Weston cut a small pine tree, and Eleanor decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper chains. She made a special dinner from their stores: roasted chicken, potatoes, canned beans, apple pie from dried fruit. Weston gave her a pair of leather gloves he'd made himself, perfectly fitted to her hands. Eleanor gave him a shirt she'd sewn from fabric she'd found in the trunk, working on it secretly for weeks. "I love it," he said, pulling it on immediately. "It fits perfect." "I measured one of your old shirts. Hoped I got it right." They sat by the fire that night, and Weston suddenly said, "I'm glad you're here." Eleanor looked at him. "I'm glad I'm here too." "No, I mean," he struggled for words. "6 months ago I was alone. Thought I'd be alone forever. Thought that was just how it was. And now you're here and everything's different, better. Even in the middle of winter, trapped in the snow, I'm happier than I've been in years." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I feel the same way. This isn't the life I thought I'd have, but it's better than anything I imagined. Even with the hard parts, the cold, the isolation, the dead calves, even with those, because the hard parts are real, they matter, and we're facing them together." Weston pulled her close. "Together." "Yeah." January was brutal. The temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in minutes. They burned through firewood faster than Weston had anticipated, and he started eyeing the furniture with genuine concern. "We might actually need to burn that chair," he said, pointing to an old rocker in the corner. "We're not burning furniture yet. There's still wood left." "Not much. And February is usually worse than January." Eleanor looked at their dwindling woodpile with worry. If they ran out of fuel, they'd freeze. It was that simple. The next day, despite Weston's protests, Eleanor bundled up and went out to the woodlot with a hatchet. If they needed more wood, she'd help cut it. "You're going to freeze," Weston said. "So are you. We'll freeze together." She handed him an axe, and, "Come on, let's get this done." They worked in shifts, warming themselves by the fire between trips outside. It took 3 days of brutal labor, but they managed to replenish their wood supply enough to feel confident about making it through the rest of winter. Eleanor's hands were blistered and bleeding again by the time they finished, but she felt accomplished. They'd faced a crisis and solved it, together. That night, soaking her hands in warm water, Eleanor suddenly felt queasy. She'd been feeling off for a few days. Tired, slightly nauseated, more emotional than usual. She'd attributed it to exhaustion and stress. But sitting there with the lamplight flickering and Weston reading nearby, Eleanor did some mental arithmetic. She counted back weeks, then months. Her blood went cold. She was late. More than late. Nearly 2 months late. No, it couldn't be. The doctor had said the infection had left her barren. She couldn't have children. That was a certainty, a grief she'd made her peace with. But her body was telling her something different. Eleanor's hands shook as she dried them. She couldn't be pregnant. The doctor had been certain, and even if she was, given what had happened before, the chances of carrying to term were slim. She needed to tell Weston. But what if she was wrong? What if this was just stress making her cycle irregular? Why get his hopes up for nothing? "You all right?" Weston asked, looking up from his book. "You look pale." "Just tired. It's been a long day." He set down the book and came to her, placing his hand on her forehead. "You're not feverish, but you do look worn out. Come to bed." Eleanor followed him to the bedroom, her mind racing. She couldn't be pregnant. But what if she was? What if this time was different? What if her body had healed enough to try again? The possibility was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. She decided to wait, give it another week or two, see if her suspicions were confirmed before saying anything. No point worrying Weston over something that might be nothing. But as she lay in the darkness with his arm around her, Eleanor's hand drifted to her stomach. And despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the memory of loss, she felt the smallest spark of hope kindle in her chest. Maybe. Just maybe. 2 weeks later, Eleanor was certain. The nausea had gotten worse, arriving like clockwork every morning. Her breasts were tender, and she was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with ranch work. She'd been through this before. She knew what it meant. She was pregnant. The knowledge terrified her. The last time had ended in blood and fever and loss. The doctor had been so sure she'd never conceive again. But here she was, her body doing the impossible, and Eleanor had no idea if this would end any differently than before. She kept the secret for 3 more days, watching Weston across the dinner table and wondering how to tell him. What if he got excited and then she lost this baby too? What if her damaged body couldn't carry a child to term? The thought of disappointing him, of watching hope die in his eyes, was almost worse than the fear of losing the baby itself. On the fourth day, the decision was taken out of her hands. Eleanor was feeding the chickens when a wave of dizziness hit her so hard she had to grab the fence post to stay upright. The world tilted sideways, and her stomach heaved. She made it behind the coop before she was violently sick, her body rejecting the breakfast she'd forced down an hour earlier. When the nausea finally passed, she looked up to find Weston standing there, concern etched across his face. "How long has this been happening?" he asked quietly. Eleanor wiped her mouth with a shaking hand. "A few days, maybe a week. And you didn't tell me? I didn't want to worry you. It might be nothing." "Eleanor." He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. "That's not nothing. We need to get you to a doctor." "We can't get to town. The snow's too deep." "Then I'll dig us a path if I have to." His voice was tight with fear. "You could be seriously ill. What if it's the fever again? What if—" "I'm not sick." Eleanor met his eyes. "Weston, I'm pregnant." He went completely still. For a moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the bare trees and the chickens clucking in their coop. Then Weston's face transformed, fear giving way to something that looked like wonder. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming it. All the signs are there. The sickness, the exhaustion, the—" She gestured vaguely at herself. "Everything." Weston's hands came up to cup her face, gentle and reverent. "We're having a baby." "Maybe. Probably. But Weston, you need to understand—" Her voice broke. "The last time I lost it, the doctor said I might not be able to carry a child at all. This could end the same way. Or it might not." His thumbs brushed away tears she didn't realize were falling. "Either way, we face it together. That's what we promised, remember? The hard stuff, too." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Weston pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully like she might shatter. "When did you know?" he asked. "I suspected a few weeks ago. Didn't want to say anything until I was certain." She pressed her face against his chest. "I'm scared. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't do this? Then we'll deal with it. But you don't get to carry this fear alone. Not anymore." He pulled back to look at her. "From now on, you tell me when you're scared, when you're worried, when you're sick. All of it. Understand?" "Yes." "Good." He kissed her forehead. "Now let's get you back to the house. You need to rest." "The chores? I'll handle the chores. You're growing a human being. That's work enough." Over the next weeks, Weston became almost comically protective. He wouldn't let Eleanor lift anything heavier than a water bucket. He took over all the physically demanding tasks, insisting she stay inside where it was warm. When Eleanor protested that she was pregnant, not made of glass, he'd give her a look that brooked no argument. "You want to help? Fine. You can cook, mend, do the light work, but you're not chopping wood or hauling feed or doing anything that might hurt you or the baby." "Weston, women have been having babies while doing ranch work since the beginning of time. Those women weren't you. And this baby is ours. I'm not taking any chances." Eleanor found his protectiveness both touching and infuriating. She wasn't used to being coddled, but she also couldn't deny that she was tired in a way that went bone deep. Her body was working overtime, creating new life from scratch, and it demanded rest whether she wanted to give it or not. The morning sickness was brutal. For weeks, Eleanor could barely keep anything down. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, and Weston watched her with worried eyes. "You need to eat something," he'd say, offering her dry toast or weak tea. "I know, my stomach doesn't agree." He started experimenting with different foods, trying to find something that wouldn't make her sick. Plain potatoes sometimes worked. Ginger tea helped with the nausea. Slowly, they figured out what her body could tolerate. By late February, the worst of the sickness had passed, and Eleanor started to feel almost human again. Her appetite returned with a vengeance. She'd wake up at midnight craving things they didn't have. Fresh fruit, soft cheese, anything that wasn't from their winter stores. "I would commit crimes for an orange right now," she said one night, staring at the pantry shelves. "Soon as the road's clear, I'll ride to town and buy you every orange they have." "You don't have to do that." "I want to. You're carrying our child. You want oranges? I'll get you oranges." March brought the first hints of spring. The snow started to melt, revealing brown grass and mud underneath. The temperature climbed above freezing during the day, though it still dropped below at night. Weston started making plans for the spring planting, for rebuilding the herd after their winter losses. Eleanor's body changed in ways that were both familiar and terrifying. She felt the baby move for the first time in early March, a flutter so faint she almost missed it. Then again, stronger. She grabbed Weston's hand and pressed it to her stomach. "Did you feel that?" His eyes went wide. "Is that the baby? That's our baby moving." Weston's hand stayed on her stomach, waiting for another movement. When it came, his whole face lit up with an expression of pure joy that made Eleanor's chest ache. "Hello in there," he said softly, talking to her belly. "This is your father. Can't wait to meet you." Eleanor laughed through tears. "You're talking to my stomach." "I'm talking to our child. There's a difference." He looked up at her. "We're really doing this. We're going to be parents." The reality of it hit Eleanor like a physical force. They were going to be parents. This tiny person growing inside her would be their responsibility, their future, their family. It was the most terrifying and wonderful thing she could imagine. As soon as the roads were passable, Weston made good on his promise and rode to town. He came back with a crate of oranges, fabric for baby clothes, and news. "Saw the doctor while I was there, told him about the baby. He said he wants to examine you as soon as you're able to travel." Eleanor's stomach clenched. "What did you tell him? About before?" "Just that you'd been pregnant once and lost it. Didn't give him details." Weston set the oranges on the table. He said it's not uncommon for women who've had one miscarriage to carry the next baby to term. Your body might have just needed time to heal. Maybe. Eleanor touched her stomach, which was just starting to swell. "But I won't feel safe until this baby is born healthy." "Neither will I, but we're doing everything right. You're eating, resting, taking care of yourself. That's all we can control." Eleanor peeled an orange and ate it slowly, savoring each segment. The taste was heaven after months of preserved food. Weston watched her with satisfaction. "Worth the ride?" "Absolutely worth it, thank you." They made the trip to town 2 weeks later, Eleanor riding Daisy carefully while Weston hovered like she might fall off at any moment. The doctor examined her thoroughly, asking questions about her symptoms and her previous pregnancy. "Everything looks normal to me," he said finally. "Baby's heartbeat is strong. You're about 5 months along, I'd estimate. Should deliver sometime in late June or early July." "And the previous miscarriage?" Eleanor asked. "Does that mean this pregnancy is at higher risk?" "Not necessarily. Every pregnancy is different. The fact that you've made it this far is a good sign." He looked at her seriously. "But I won't lie to you, there's always risk, especially out on an isolated ranch. If anything goes wrong during the birth, you'll need help fast." "What are you saying?" Weston's voice was tight. "I'm saying you might want to consider having Mrs. Hale stay in town for the last month of pregnancy. That way, if there are complications, I'm right there." Eleanor and Weston exchanged glances. The thought of being separated for a month, especially right before the birth, made Eleanor's chest hurt. But the doctor's concerns were valid. "We'll think about it," Weston said. On the ride home, they were both quiet, processing the doctor's words. "I don't want to leave you," Eleanor said finally. "Not for a whole month." "I don't want you to leave either. But if it's safer for you and the baby..." "We don't know that it's safer. What if I go into labor early? What if something happens while I'm in town and you're at the ranch?" She shook her head. "I'd rather be home with you." Weston was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What if we asked Sarah to come stay with us? Last month or so. She's had a baby. She'd know what to do if something went wrong." "Would she agree to that?" "Only one way to find out." Sarah agreed immediately when they asked her a few days later. "Of course I'll come. Marcus can manage the ranch for a few weeks, and I'll bring the baby with me. It'll be good to have company." Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wouldn't have to leave Weston, and she'd have experienced help when her time came. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than being separated. Spring unfolded across the prairie in waves of green and gold. The grass came back, the wildflowers bloomed, and the cattle that had survived winter looked healthier with each passing day. Weston planted the garden with Eleanor supervising from a chair he'd set up in the shade. She wanted to help dig and plant, but he refused to let her. "You can tell me what to do. That's helping. I'm perfectly capable of planting seeds. And you'll do it next year. This year, you're staying off your feet." His tone left no room for argument. Eleanor's body continued to change in ways that amazed and frightened her. Her stomach grew round and hard. The baby kicked constantly, strong enough now that Weston could feel it from the outside. They'd lie in bed at night with his hand on her belly, feeling their child move and speculating about who they'd be. Boy or girl? Weston asked one night. I don't know. Does it matter? Not even a little, just curious. He traced patterns on her stomach. Either way, this kid's going to be stubborn as hell, takes after their mother. Stubborn is a survival trait out here. Yeah, it is. He kissed her temple. You're going to be a good mother. Eleanor's eyes burned. I hope so. Terrified I won't be. You will be. I've seen how you care for everything on this ranch, how you are with Sarah's baby. You've got maternal instinct in spades. He paused. And I promise I'll be a good father, or I'll die trying. You'll be amazing. You're patient, kind, protective, all the things a father should be. They held each other in the darkness, two people who'd been broken by life and were somehow healing each other while building something new. May brought new challenges. Eleanor's back ached constantly from carrying the extra weight. Her feet swelled. She couldn't sleep comfortably in any position. She was hot all the time, even when Weston was still wearing a jacket. The discomfort made her irritable, and more than once she snapped at Weston over nothing. I'm sorry, she'd say afterward. I don't mean to be difficult. You're growing a whole human being inside you. You're allowed to be difficult. He'd rub her feet or her back or bring her water without being asked. His patience seemed endless. The baby dropped lower in early June, and Eleanor knew her time was getting close. Sarah arrived with baby Grace settling into the spare room Weston had prepared. Having another woman in the house was strange at first, but Eleanor quickly grew to appreciate Sarah's calm competence. How are you feeling? Sarah would ask each morning. Like I swallowed a watermelon and it's trying to escape. That's about right. Won't be long now. Eleanor both dreaded and longed for labor to start. She wanted to meet her baby, wanted this pregnancy to be over, wanted confirmation that everything would be all right. But she was also terrified. The memory of last time, the pain, the blood, the loss, haunted her. What if something goes wrong? She asked Sarah one afternoon while Weston was out checking fence lines. Then we handle it. But Eleanor, you're healthy. The baby's healthy. There's no reason to think this won't go fine. There was no reason to think the last one wouldn't go fine either, until it didn't. Sarah took her hand. I know you're scared. That's normal. But you can't live in that fear. You have to trust your body. Trust that this time is different. How? Because this time, you're not alone. You have Weston, you have me, you have a whole community ready to help if you need it. That makes all the difference. Labor started 3 days later in the middle of the night. Eleanor woke to a pain low in her back, different from the usual pregnancy aches. She lay there for a moment, trying to decide if this was really it. Then her water broke, soaking the bed, and there was no more doubt. Weston. She shook his shoulder. It's time. He was awake instantly, fumbling to light the lamp. You're sure? I'm sure. Get Sarah. The next hours were a blur of pain and fear and determination. Sarah coached her through the contractions, her voice steady and calm. Weston held Eleanor's hand, let her squeeze until his fingers went numb, wiped sweat from her forehead. You're doing so good, he kept saying, so strong. Almost there. But the labor went on and on. 6 hours, 8, 10. Eleanor was exhausted, delirious with pain. The baby wasn't coming, and she could see worry creeping into Sarah's expression. Something's wrong, Eleanor gasped between contractions. Just like last time, something's wrong. Nothing's wrong. Baby's just taking their time. But Sarah's voice was tight. Eleanor, next contraction, I need you to push harder than you ever have. Understand? Eleanor nodded, too tired to speak. When the next wave of pain hit, she bore down with everything she had, screaming with the effort. Again, Sarah commanded. One more time. Eleanor pushed again, and suddenly there was release, pressure giving way, and then the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby crying, loud and angry and alive. It's a boy, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. Eleanor, you have a son. Eleanor collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing with relief and joy. Sarah placed the baby on her chest, a tiny red-faced creature wailing his displeasure at being born. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair, and lungs that worked beautifully. Hello, baby, Eleanor whispered, touching his impossibly small hand. Hello, my son. Weston was crying, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his child. He's beautiful. He's perfect. Eleanor, we did it. We did it, she agreed, unable to look away from the tiny person in her arms. Sarah cleaned them both up, checked that everything was as it should be, then quietly left the room to give them privacy. Eleanor and Weston sat together in the lamplight, marveling at the miracle they'd created. What should we name him? Weston asked, tracing the baby's cheek with one gentle finger. Eleanor thought about everything they'd been through. The pain, the loss, the hard work of building a life together, the fear they'd faced and conquered. Something strong, something that means survival. They settled on James, after Weston's father. James Hale, born on a Wyoming ranch to parents who'd survived their own private wars to build something beautiful together. The baby nursed for the first time, latching on with determined strength, and Eleanor felt something settle deep in her chest. She'd done it. She'd carried a child to term. She'd given birth. Her body, which she'd thought was broken beyond repair, had created new life. Thank you, Weston said quietly. For what? For being brave enough to try again, for trusting me, for giving me this. He gestured at the baby, for giving us this. Eleanor leaned against him, exhausted and happy. We gave this to each other. That's what partners do. Over the next weeks, the ranch transformed into something neither Eleanor nor Weston had imagined. The lonely house filled with the sounds of a baby crying, cooing, demanding attention at all hours. Eleanor was exhausted in a completely new way, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from caring for someone you loved more than your own life. Weston was a natural father, to Eleanor's delight. He'd hold James for hours, talking to him about the ranch, about the cattle, about everything and nothing. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with a crying baby at 2 a.m, and looked at his son like he'd hung the moon. I never thought I'd have this, he said one night, watching James sleep in the cradle he'd built. A family, something good and pure that came from me. You deserve good things, you always did. Maybe, but I didn't believe it until you showed up and proved it to me. Sarah stayed for 2 more weeks, helping Eleanor learn to care for a newborn, making sure both mother and baby were healthy. When she finally left, Eleanor hugged her tight. Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to. Sarah smiled. Welcome to motherhood, Eleanor. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do and the most rewarding. She was right about both parts. The summer passed in a haze of sleepless nights and small joys. Eleanor learned to function on 3 hours of sleep. She figured out how to nurse while doing other tasks, how to soothe a crying baby, how to read James's different cries and know what he needed. Weston ran the ranch largely by himself that summer, taking on double duty so Eleanor could focus on the baby. They fell into a new rhythm, different from before but just as functional. Partners adapting to their new reality. Word of James's birth spread through the community, and visitors came bringing gifts and congratulations. Margaret brought baby clothes, the Chens brought preserved food to help Eleanor keep her strength up. Even Mrs. Fletcher stopped by with a hand-knitted blanket, her expression almost warm. Fine-looking boy, she said gruffly. Looks like his father. Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher. You done good, Eleanor Hale. Real good. It was as close to an apology for months of judgment as Eleanor would get, but it was enough. In August, Eleanor started teaching again. Not in a formal school, that would come later, but small lessons for ranch children whose parents brought them to the Hale Ranch once a week. Sarah's older children came. The Torres kids, a few others from families scattered across the prairie. Eleanor taught them reading, writing, basic arithmetic, sitting on the porch with James sleeping in a basket beside her. It felt good to use her mind again, to pass on knowledge, to be more than just a mother and wife. You're happy, Weston observed one evening after her students had left. I am. I have everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, work that matters. Eleanor looked at him. Do you know what the difference is between this life and my old one in Boston? What? This one is real. The people here care about what you do, not who your family is or how much money you have. They care about honesty and hard work and whether you'll help when they need it. She smiled. I matter here, not because of my name or my position, but because of who I actually am. You always mattered. Boston just couldn't see it. Maybe, but I can see it now. And that's what counts. By autumn, James was thriving. He'd grown plump and healthy, his dark eyes curious about everything. He smiled at his parents, made happy noises, and had started trying to roll over. Eleanor's heart expanded every time she looked at him. amazed that this perfect little person had come from her body. They took James to town in September, showing him off to the community. People crowded around to see the baby who'd been born on the Hale Ranch, who'd survived his mother's difficult pregnancy and complicated birth. "He's beautiful," the seamstress said. "Got his mother's determination, I'd wager." "And his father's stubbornness," Eleanor added, making everyone laugh. Standing there in the town square, surrounded by people who'd become friends, holding her son while her husband's arm was around her shoulders, Eleanor felt complete in a way she'd never experienced. This was home. This was family. This was the life she'd built from the ashes of her old one. When winter came again, Eleanor faced it without the fear that had haunted her the previous year. She knew what to expect now, knew how to prepare, how to endure, how to find joy even in the darkest, coldest months. And this year, she wouldn't be facing it with just Weston. She'd have James, too, growing and changing and reminding them both what they were working for. The first snow fell on a November evening. Eleanor stood on the porch with James bundled in her arms, showing him the white flakes drifting down from the sky. He watched with wide eyes, fascinated. "That's snow," Eleanor told him. "It means winter's here. But don't worry, we're ready for it this time." Weston came up behind them, wrapping his arms around both of them. "We're more than ready. We're strong enough to handle whatever comes." Eleanor leaned back against him, feeling safe and loved and home. A year ago, she'd been terrified of winter isolation. Now she knew it would be all right. They had each other. They had their son. They had a ranch that was thriving and a community that had accepted them. "I love you," she said to Weston. "I don't think I've said that enough. You show it every day, but I love hearing it." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you too, both of you." James made a happy sound, and they all laughed. Inside, the house was warm and bright. The pantry was full. The firewood was stacked. Everything they needed to survive the winter was prepared and waiting. But more than that, they had hope. They had love. They had a future they'd built together from nothing. Eleanor thought about the woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach crying, broken and desperate and alone. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from another life. The woman Eleanor had become was stronger, braver, more real. She'd been tested by frontier life and hadn't just survived, she'd flourished. Sometimes the hardest thing in the world was trusting that you deserved a second chance, that your past mistakes didn't define your future, that you could be loved despite your flaws and failures. Eleanor had learned all of that on this Wyoming ranch, with a man who'd seen her at her lowest and chosen her anyway. And maybe that was the real lesson. Not that love fixed everything or made life easy, but that real love, the honest, hardworking, unglamorous kind, gave you the strength to face whatever came next, together. The wind picked up, blowing snow across the prairie, and Eleanor carried James inside. Weston followed, closing the door against the cold. And in that warm house, with lamplight golden on the walls and a baby cooing in his mother's arms, the Hale family settled in for another Wyoming winter. Not because they had to, not because they had no other choice, but because they wanted to. Because this was home. Because they'd built something worth keeping, worth fighting for, worth holding on to through every season, harsh or kind, and that made all the difference.